Hi, good morning everyone. So, as most of you know me, I am Monica Navandar. I am the managing partner for the Human Insights Corporation. And I'm just so happy that all of you made time to come to the event. So, thank you so much. And from our team, from the Human Insights Corporation, we have Andre Pandey sitting right there. He's the founder and managing director of the Human Insights Corporation. We have Steve Harrison from London. So he's the partner of THIC as well. And Andre will tell you more about THIC later. What I wanted to do is just share of how happy we are that we have such a diverse group of people gathered today for the soft launch of THIC in India. And I'm just going to call out some names of what kind of industries and sectors we have today in here. So we have pharma, manufacturing, NGOs, e-commerce, insurance, social media, telecom, IT, banking and financial, artificial intelligence and analytics, consulting organizations, hospitality, and that is just to name a few. So we have many more, so we're just very happy that we could gather such diverse crowd with us today. The purpose of today's gathering is to share our innovative concept, talent value management. And we've implemented TVM, so we call it TVM, that's the short form, and we call the Human Insights Corporation THIC. So those are the words I use. So TVM we've implemented successfully for growing organizations in Middle East and South Africa, and what we're looking at today's gathering is really your support and honest feedback when we share with you, not just TVM, but we are sharing today unconscious bias value mapping. So we're unique and exclusive, and nobody else in the world is doing unconscious bias value mapping, and we'll be sharing commercial astuteness as well. So what we are trying to do is really striving to change the mindset and the capabilities of the HR fraternity from being a support function to driving the business's bottom line. So one important announcement I wanted to make is please remember to get the copy of the latest worldwide selling book, Talent Value Management, signed by the author, Andre himself. So we've organized a book signing session at the end of the event. So please do collect your books, and Andre is always open for pictures. So let us begin with our first panel discussion. The topic is leveraging a diverse workforce to grow market share. So I'd like to invite my fellow panelists to join me on the stage. So Abhishek Tiwari, Executive Director and Head of People, KPMG Global Services. Ranjan Mishra, Senior Vice President HR, Vodafone. Bidisha Banerjee, Chief Talent Development, Future Group. According to me, the business case for diversity has never been more front and center than it is now. And why not? Basic economic theory suggests that consumers will correct for a company's lack of diversity by simply not spending money there. So making slow to change organizations extinct. And the same can be said about employees who are always trying to manage and balance where they work, whether it matches their values other than what personal benefits they are deriving, but what is the organization doing? What's the purpose of the organization? So everybody has started caring more about it. So I'll request each of my fellow panelists to share thoughts on how we've often heard that D&I is the right thing to do, but that is no more good enough. And it would be great if you could share your organization's position statement around diversity and inclusion, and an example that exemplifies an initiative that speaks more about what the statement is.
Okay, good morning everyone. Really happy to be on this panel, and I was just telling Monica, I really made it against all odds today here. I work with Future Group, and as you know, it's the largest retail organization in India. We employ about 46,000 employees, and considering I'm in the space of learning and development in D&I, it's very close to my heart. However, just to kind of answer Monica's question as to, what is our organization stand on D&I and what is it that we're doing? I just like to say that we've been in this space of retail now for the last 15 years, and diversity and inclusion is not just gender for us. It's people from different spaces, different parts of India, so diversity in culture, ethnicity, race. It also stands for people with disabilities. We're actually running a huge campaign to have high representation in our stores, at least 1 or 2 employees across all our stores in Future Group, with 1 or 2 employees who are people with disabilities. And of course, women in the retail force. So if you know you've walked to any of our stores like Big Bazaar, Central, Hometown, E-Zone, you will see a lot of women. So actually for Future Group, this is not a number game at all. So we really don't want to make a statement saying, okay, we're going to have this ratio or this percentage. It's actually a process of changing people's mindset, and we look at the entire D&I concept as a business initiative. So we're very, very clear about that. So it's not something that I'm doing over and above my role. Okay, we've actually established, I've worked with CEOs saying how it has direct links to innovation, to thought, and actually to business value. So that's our stand on D&I, where we look at it as something which has direct impact on business profitability. It has an impact on productivity of employees. And we believe we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg. There's lots to explore. So this is actually just, we're taking very small steps. And I think through our conversation, I will tell you more about what we've done.
Awesome. I actually have follow-up questions. I think this is not working. Ranjan?
Oh, sure. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here in this gathering. You know, the journey for Vodafone started around 9 years back, when the current CEO and managing director came for the first executive staff meeting. It was all white, it was all Brit, it was all men.
What's wrong with that?
So it was, I think, the thought process germinated there that there's something which is not right in this organization. And we need to be more inclusive. From there, we took a step that, you know, we need to drive it as an integral part of the business strategy. And I think one point which I'll little add and differ to what my fellow colleague has said, and I think that's the advantage of such forums wherein you hear the complementary as well as conflicting views, is that from our organization we have driven it on 2-pronged fundamentals. One is number and other one is the ecosystem. So ecosystem was more around working on the unconscious bias, and especially in this country, and not only this country, if you look at in Africa, in Italy, it was the participation of women, especially in the corporate, is something which is very, very minimal. So we started working on both the sides. We said that we want to look at numbers also. It should not happen that you know, we consistently say that, you know, we're working on building the ecosystem only, but numbers are not reflecting. So in the business language, I think if something gets tracked on a regular basis, it becomes a part of the regular reviews. In our case, diversity is a part of every market CEO's goal sheet.
Nice.
And within the country, the regulatory body gives the license on the circle basis. So every province, by and large, is divided into a circle. Every circle business head has a diversity number and ecosystem. So he need to tell what is one great thing that they have done as an initiative, which is more around building the ecosystem, and how is it that the numbers are moving. Because we are on this journey, slowly we moved into how the things are on the leadership level. So that's another sort of change of gear that we have done some 3.5 years back. Because what we have seen for us, it is very easy at the entry level wherein you go and you hire around 400 to 500 people. You pick up from the B school the girls, which is 50-50, and every year you increase it by 1 or 2% on overall 14,000-15,000 headcount. So that was another change that we have done. Some of the things that we have done, because I feel it is not on the the corporate sector, but we need the support from outside as well. So what is it that the large organizations are doing? So some of the things that I would like to share is we have sent around 25,000 school kids below the age of 15 in Bundi district alone, because in that area, the school going kids is something which was a challenge. In one of the open houses, okay, when we asked that why is it that we do not have too many women in the frontline sales, one very peculiar input came to us, that when we are in the market all the time, we do not have washrooms. We made 500 washrooms across upcountry market for our women folks, and then we started adding. So what my colleague said, building the ecosystem and then driving the numbers is what I'm adding on top of it. Recently, from this year onwards, globally we are driving a program called STEM, because we have seen that the contribution of women gender if you go to IITs, okay, if you unfortunately got day 2, okay, you will have only male members to hire. Even if you get on day 0 or day 1, okay, there'll be very, very small contribution as far as the numbers are concerned. So what we have started doing worldwide, and in India it's a small step that we are taking and looking into how is it going to be. We call it STEM, which is science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And what we are going to do, we are going to work with 50 school kids, which is the from 5th to 8th, and work with them on web designing and web coding. Okay. So that's what it is, which I would just to name few.
Sure, thank you. You answered quite a few questions that I had around what are you doing with accelerating the development of women. So Abhishek, if you can share about KPMG and then just take forward with what Ranjan was talking about, accelerated movement and promotion and development of women leaders, because they generally about 80% decision makers, especially when it comes to health and pharma industry.
No, it's interesting. I come from a consulting organization, and we preach, for lack of a better word, the word, right? And we haven't ourselves, I have to be candid in the room, done a great job at being a truly inclusive workplace. So, but I am very proud to tell you that we've taken giant steps in the past few years. Our US organization, KPMG in the US, which houses about 30,000 people, is actually known to be one of the leaders in the American market when it comes to. So we get an advantage of some of the best practices within the network. Coming back to India, our journey has not been very old. I think, and when we went to grassroots, we realized that there is diversity in perspectives that prevents inclusion to take place at workplace. And that diversity is primarily from the society we come from, is holding back a lot of our inclusive practices. All of us come from that society. And then there are able men and women sitting in a conference room discussing how we should make an inclusive place out of the same people that come from that society. And that was our starting point. Having said that, in the last 18 to 24 months, we have we've taken some significant steps, and absolutely, one of my colleagues said that it is business imperative. It is not an HR engagement activity. There are 3 things that we are focusing on in KPMG. I think gender being the first. We are about 45% women when it comes to women colleagues, when it comes to KPMG as a whole.
But are you saying they are a part of also your senior leadership team?
Exactly, yeah, that was the second thing I was going to say. Unfortunately, we have about 12% women when it comes to managers and above rates, and there's a sharp dip from that level. And of course, we can find excuses to say there are there are situations with family front that prevent women from going up. But I don't think And that is what we have done in the last 18 months. We have moved from that mindset of saying that, we can't possibly have women rise their life if they don't want to themselves. I think from an organization standpoint, I'll give you an example. We had a British lady who used to be heading one of our audit businesses. She was from Scotland. She used to be the head of audit of Scotland, came here on a transfer. She found it very strange that women at the level of around senior, team leader and assistant manager, just quit work one day because they were getting married to someone whose family was elsewhere and mother-in-law doesn't want work and all that, them to work. She would actually call the mother-in-law or the prospective mother-in-law of that lady and say, why are you preventing such a bright girl from not rising and becoming like me or like anyone else you see around? And she could actually convert about 30% of them to stay. I mean, 70% still went. But she just found it a very strange system. And I just gave you that vague example, but we actually adopted it in our strategy to say that every leader, when he or she gets such a case, I think has to not only, of course, calling is one piece, but just create an ecosystem for that lady to return to work. Keep in touch, talk to the husband, talk to the in-laws if you have to. But so we actually appointed a head of inclusion and diversity in KPMG for the first time, like I told you. This was a position that was sanctioned. It is a leadership position. Our CEO is absolutely clear that like Ranjan said, it is in the goal sheet of all our business leaders. There's a long way to go. Gender, like I said, is one. Persons with different abilities is another. And a third interesting one is the generational diversity that we focus on. We are becoming a younger organization, not any older, because we're hiring more and more young people. The average age of the organization that I lead HR for is about 26 and a half, which means, and the average age of leadership is close to 42. So you can already see, the Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z kind of a difference. We are trying to integrate that gap. We are trying to consolidate that gap and have things like reverse mentoring done, etc. But more on it when we get to.
Sure. I think you just touched upon all three of you, on some brilliant points, and that actually brings me to something that we all probably know about, or maybe we are not aware, but how this happens and how the glass ceiling still exists. And when you're talking about 45 to 12%, what's happening there is definitely unconscious bias. So there are some 20 cognitive biases that affect our everyday decision making, and in ways that we don't even know, we don't even realize. We receive 11 million bits of information every second, and our brain can process just 40. So it is also, the brain takes a mental shortcut, and it's said, the research says that you make 35,000 decisions every day. So how quick, how fast? So your experience, your environment, your emotional state, it all influences your decision making, especially talking about the workplace. I think that's how it affects and influences the leaders who are making decisions, or the recruiters. And two things that I wanted to touch upon were definitely around gender diversity, and especially 2016 US election being an example, classic example of the glass ceiling and what people end up doing, that they end up hiring, recruiting, promoting people who are more like them, or they certainly have this preconceived bias that a CEO should look like this. So some of the examples, one is definitely the affinity bias, like me bias. The other is around just some numbers I wanted to share. So in US, 60% of CEOs are over 6 foot tall. Only 15% of their population is 6 foot tall. And about that, there are 36% of US CEOs that are 6.2 feet tall. And only 4% of their population is 6.2 feet tall. So there's definitely this bias. So this is what happens when I would say we're doing recruitment or we're talking about succession planning. People always they have this preconceived bias, who should look like So this is a position, and this is the person we should be looking at, and he should look like this, and they hire, not based on what they bring to the table or the value they're driving. Another case study is how obese men and women are less likely to get interviewed or even called for an interview compared to their leaner peers. So my question to all of you is, when you talk about creating this inclusive workplace, unconscious bias is so difficult to overcome. So what do you do about that? Yes, you talk about inclusion, and you talk about holding the leadership accountable in terms of what gets measured gets done. But what do you do about this, about things that people are not even aware about, that they have these biases?
I think one way to, Monica, to look at it is, of course, having a bias. And I think largely being a woman myself, and I'm sure a lot of us would agree, that I think a lot of training and coaching and mentoring is needed for women themselves. Because first of all, I think it starts with us saying that, you know, okay, I'll get married and I'll have to give up, or I can't do X, Y, Z. See, why I'm saying this, because in retail, largely, the kind of people that we employ, they come from very humble backgrounds. So if you've stayed in Bombay, there's a concept called chawls, right? Most of them live in chawls, right? So when these women come and work in our stores, there's completely, they're very intimidated because their average salary is 10 to 12,000 rupees a month. You have a shopper who comes in and at one shot on one day makes a bill of 25,000, right? So that disconnect is very high in our stores, right? What I'm really trying to get at is, one, of course, is to look at that, okay, yes, women are very less in the C-suite, but I think what we've done in Future Group is actually also targeted the base, right? And to change that bias, what we've done is really speaking to women, doing workshops and getting them to recognize their own strength, making them feel empowered to stand up for themselves, make those choices, be brave enough. So we have a concept, we have an initiative called ARA, wherein we realized, we did a study about our store employees. So out of 46,000 people, about 36 something will be in the stores, out of which, let's say 30% of that will be women. We realized that the reason that they're not growing is because for some reason in India, women's education comes last. So the brother will get to complete graduation and the girl child will not. So most of them were not able to complete graduation. So as an organization, what we did is we identified the high potentials in the stores and we sponsored their graduation. So as of today, we have about 486 women in our organization who are actually doing and completing their graduation through the ARA program. And another reason we realized that biases and gets built up is because, again in India, and just to sound off my colleague, that we don't have support systems. You know, like, I mean, in the UK and Australia, you have very good support system where you can leave your child, right? We don't have help, we don't have that choice. So therefore, working on weekends, working long hours is a challenge with women in India, and that will take a long time to solve. So what we've done, we realized that in our stores, okay, one way of growing in a stores is becoming a store manager and taking the operations route. But you have other support functions that are in our stores, which is your visual merchandise, your cashiering, your customer service desk. We've launched this initiative called Disha, which is targeted at, again, high potential women, saying that, okay, you don't want to become team leader, you don't want to get into operations, we're going to open another avenue for you, which will not require you to stay till 12, 13 hours workday, which will not require you to come in on weekends and be at home for festivals and things like that, which is very important in women, in Indian tradition. So I think the bias exists a lot with women themselves. When I say bias, that they need help. They need help in telling them that it's possible. They need more role models. So what we've done really to answer your question is that we've identified role models who are women in our stores, okay, who've actually grown through the operation channel or moved to other roles, and we use them to speak to women in their locality, in their zones. And that happens through a structured process where we do these mentoring sessions. And so I think the bias needs to get killed from women first, and then it automatically changes at the top. And thankfully, in terms of succession planning and recruitment, because being retail and especially a lot of influence of fashion, we don't have such a skewed gender issue because there are a lot of women in coming out of NIFTs and NID. So I think at the senior level, it'll happen, it'll get there, but I think at somewhere we need to start at the very base and correcting the situation there, because right now I can only crib and say, okay, there is only, for example, 12% of our employee base is at CEO level, but what does it take to ensure that 10 years from now there are double that number or triple that number? So that's what we're looking at.
So good, and actually that brings me to a question for Abhishek. When you speak about PWD and minorities, and especially LGBT being such a zone of discomfort, so when we speak about unconscious bias and with all these initiatives, people are not even comfortable identifying themselves since the laws don't support it. So are you in your organization or when you're consulting to other organizations, how do you make sure that you make that environment safe for them? Like, a lot of organizations are struggling with it.
So the December 2013 verdict of Supreme Court, as many of you may know, in India, recriminalized homosexuality, and that as an organization worldwide, we are, like I said, we are leaders in a whole lot of spaces, including the LGBT space. In India, because of the legal that statutory environment, we have taken a call that we will not ask and we will not discriminate. So, which means that we will, if people are willing to sort of declare it, we are absolutely fine with it. There is no discrimination. Come and work. I'm aware of a conversation that's going on today these days in the Indian leadership, is that do we therefore come out boldly and in the support of just making sure that we appear both in fact and in perception as not non-discriminatory, to say the least, and to be supportive of people's choices when it came to sexuality. So clearly, in India we've taken a more safer stance rather than just sort of going out there. But there's a discussion going on right now to say that we need to really sort of break the glass ceiling and move on with embracing it completely.
We have Lavina with us. So maybe you could share a few thoughts, and then we'll open up the questions for audience.
Good morning. Apologies. I had some problem with my car, unfortunately, and I got a bit delayed. From the hospitality industry perspective, the general perception, is that because it's a customer service, etc., there would be more women, especially in the workforce, which is not the case, because other than Marriott, which is a global leader in hospitality, which has around 40% representation, most of the Indian hotel chains have roughly about between 13 to 16%, which is very less. And especially, from a customer service perspective, a lot of it is guest interface. A lot of emotions get connected when you're servicing the guest, and that is where the customer delight comes in. This is also part of a study that we did when we spoke to our guests to understand what kind of service are they looking for. So we had put in place mentoring programs, etc. So we have a database of our internal talent. What is their performance potential, what are their own career aspirations. We have also profiled external talent, and what have been their moves, what are they looking for, etc. At the same time, the challenge that we feel from a hiring perspective is, if you go to a school of hospitality, out of 50 students sitting there, you will find 2 women. So the intake, the entry level intake itself is drying up. So what we have done is, we have put in place a program wherein we are going to colleges, non-hospitality colleges, and we are inviting women to be part of it. We put them through a detailed structured training program, and we call it the Taj Learning Academy. And then we place them in entry-level talent. So that way we are able to grow talent from inside itself. That has kind of helped us. So last year, especially my region, I had West of Indian Africa. We were at 13%. As on date, we are at 18%. And there's a lot of focus. Every general manager is responsible for, so every month I track what is the gender diversity ratio, what is the hiring, etc. And the general manager is responsible. It's no longer the HR responsibility. The other thing is we have gender diversity champions. And most of it, I would say 80% are men. So it's men who are driving this, and we are not, yes. So we are not making it a women thing. We are not making it a HR thing, you know, so the business is driving it. Also from a leadership perspective, you'll have the CEO, you'll have the business head, everybody talking about why it is important to have women there. So, you know, so even the support and buy-in from tops also comes in, and I think that has helped quite a bit.
I think you touched upon two very important points, and that we could relate to our personal lives as well as organizations. So two men here, my husband, Shefali's husband, Babar, I mean, she's a mother also. And how the husbands are really promoting, supporting, and always being there. And you could just show hand, Babar and Shefali. So we're friends, so obviously I know like personal stuff of how men really play a big role, and they need to be always our ally to move forward. Another important aspect you touched was producing a diverse slate when we are looking at hiring. So you're not just looking at hospitality industry. I think that also stands true when we're looking at moving people around, and we should have more of business leaders moved into different functions, or more of HR, IT, finance, just having more cross-sector, cross-functional moves. And this is a great discussion, but we're running short on time, so I'm going to open up the floor to the audience for questions. Take one.
Hi. Ranjan, my question is for you. In India, the demographics is very diverse. All of us, when we talk about organization, the metrics that we typically measure in terms of diversity and inclusion is in terms of, you know, gender ratio, in terms of differently abled, in terms of number of years of experience, millennials versus dinosaurs like us. So my question is, India has a lot of different demographics. You have the caste system, you have the regional biases. How do you really work through this? In my case, what has worked is you keep listening, keep your ears to the ground, and whenever there's a silo, you just go and break the silo. Other thing that has worked for me is we came up with a rule that nobody can report to the same manager for more than 3 years. So you shift them around, you give them different experience. But your workforce is very diverse. You work through the country, you have much bigger and diverse workforce. So how do you really deal with it?
Very, very interesting point that you are bringing, I think, to this inclusion piece and diversity piece. Because we operate, you know, in the length and breadth of the country, what we ensure, you know, whenever we roll out, there is a discussion with the regulatory authorities and district administration and state administration. We ensure that there is more jobs that are created for local people. Be it in the form of opening call centers, be it in the form of opening the back-end processes, or circle sales force. The point is that they are given to the jobs are given to the local people. So that's one way of tracking it. Then we also look at, and we have done this survey, I think around 3.5 years back, that if I'm talking about Assam and Northeast, in the leadership team, how many people are there who are at the local level? So it's the same thing that we have sort of drawn or copy pasted from our group initiative, that you need to look at in a particular market. Is the CEO from that market? Is the DRs which is the direct reports of the CEO are from local market? And then you build a cross-pollination of talent, and then you move. So that is something which we have tracked. But are we tracking that to an extent wherein I'm looking at the age, as my friend said, or I'm looking at diversity? The answer is no. We had one of those surveys, it just clicked my mind that yes, we did something around that. But if you ask me, can you tell me 3 states and where are you vis-a-vis that? Answer is no. So I would not like to sort of give an answer which looks good, but it is something which we track. But is it on the top of my mind? Is every CEO or business head would have these numbers on the back of his palm? Answer is no. So I think this is an area which is a good reminder. Maybe I'll go back to the drawing board and start driving this point.
Yeah, the challenge is how many will you track, right?
Exactly.
That was my challenge as well. How many of these? India is very diverse. I'm sure many countries are. And I exactly do the same, keep the ears close to the ground. When you find a silo, you find provision, just go and break it, and then have a general policy saying nobody will report to the same manager.
Nilanka, did you have a quick question, or because we need to start the next panel? So
Okay,
you can ask.
Okay. So, the question, I'll keep it very quick. It was more on the inclusion and more from people with disability. We have been speaking throughout the discussion more on gender, and please don't take, the lady colleagues don't take me otherwise.
We have so many today, I'm so happy.
But I don't think so we are very serious about that. So is this a bias, or is this the compulsions which we are talking about of inclusiveness of people with disability? In terms of, we do hire people with mostly either they are hearing impaired or speech impaired, but not beyond that. Neither our offices or the stores have accessible. We don't do a barrier-free audit also. Many of us, we don't do it. And that's not there in the top of our agenda. The more we talk about inclusion, we're talking about gender diversity. So that's my question.
I want to answer that because I feel very strongly about it, because we've done a lot of work around that. So I was just at another meeting last week, and the people with disabilities population in India is about 2.83 crores, out of which we have an employment ratio of 36%, which comes to about 96,000 or 93 lakhs 40,000 people. To answer your questions, we are very serious about it, because we see that if you're not addressing the 2.83 crores, they are employees who can have the potential to work with us. So we're investing a lot. So we've tied up with at least 3 agencies which actually help us recruit people with disabilities. And again, we've designed a store which also invites customers who are disabled and use wheelchairs. So there's a big bazaar in Matunga. I'll request you to please visit that. Okay, it's completely compliant to the international standards of people with disabilities and infrastructure rules. So it's a small step. We're doing it. And we drive regular learning sensitivity programs for people with disabilities, and we have them across our organization. So one is, of course, at the store level. I'll give you examples where CEOs 5 years back were saying that, okay, it's retail, it's customer facing, how are they going to talk to people? So we were able to put them only in warehousing and back in jobs. But today it's come to a point that people with disabilities stay with us. They are very loyal because they look at this as an opportunity, as a career. So I'm really glad to tell you that we've had people who are SHI, who are not able to, who don't have a limb missing, but still are in the front end, and they do a great job. So I think it's changing, and I think, again, it's not a CSR activity, and like I said, it's, for us, it's 2.83 population in India which are untapped. So we're looking at it again as a large business initiative, saying that, one, how do you attract these people? Other part is, how do you attract these customers to walk into the stores? And just to share with you, in the Big Bazaar Matunga store, when we did this, there were customers who came into with wheelchairs, and it was the first time in their lives that they actually went grocery shopping by themselves. Okay, so it's changing. It's one store today in India, but we're trying to pick regions across India where we will be doing this. And as of today, in Future Group, we have about 382 people who are physically disabled in one way or the other. But what's a good thing that's happening, that these organizations, and there are organizations available who give you trained staff, right? So they will actually send you people where they come with basic professional etiquette, they come with some amount of retail knowledge or whatever industry knowledge you're gaining. So it's a matter of intent from the management cause, and it's not that difficult. So it's very easily doable. If we can do it in retail, being a completely front-end facing business, I think anybody
No,
can do
I
it.
think I actually have a different point of view, and this is not just a problem in India. This is a global phenomenon, and we feel people are doing very good job in US or Canada, Australia, Europe, and especially with PWD. But there is a lot of work to be done even there, since I have worked at enterprise level and within diversity and inclusion for a very long period. This is not just restricted to India, but yes, as you're saying, we need to make our workplaces more friendly and welcoming. But I think it's easier to drive when you look at it as they are your customers. I would like to invite Andre to hand over books to the panelists. Let's take a picture and let's start the next panel discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, I just want to say something.
Yeah, please.
Just for the sake of time, I will say a few words. First of all, I'm unbelievably happy to be here today. And I was on the flight yesterday morning. I was sitting next to somebody, and he was an Indian local, and he started to speak to me in his local language. Yeah? So obviously, there was unconscious bias around, like me. He thought that, we're from the same background. But I think the point I'm trying to make, somewhere in my lineage there's an Indian heritage, and I'm trying to find out exactly where it is. So it's like a homecoming. So I'm really, really glad I'm here. So much diverse people, so much diverse experiences. I really look forward to talking to you on my sessions later and kind of engage you, but likewise, dual engagement. So for the panelists, thank you very much. Very insightful. Emphasis on insights and insightful. Copy of my book. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Can we just get a picture with all of them as one panel? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Steve, it's your turn now. Okay, Steve will moderate the topic, Can Organizations Manage Sustainable Culture Change? And Hari TN, Head HR, Big Basket. Mr. Magasa, CHRO, UNICEF. Ruchi Mathur, CEO, Pune City Connect. I just want to share something about her. She's one of the most powerful and influential women leaders this year, the top 50 in India. I'm being biased here, talking only. And we have Sameer Dhanrajani, Chief Strategy Officer, Fractal Analytics.
Well, good morning. Lovely to be here. I'm obviously white, I'm male, and I'm British, which we all decide. So, I'll take that as a sort of a diversity point for the day. This panel is going to be an interesting one, and hopefully a build on the diversity and inclusion topic, because what we'd like to talk about is culture. Okay. Now, there's going to be two parts to where I lead the panel. First is, what is it? So I'll give them the opportunity to answer that question. But then I have some specific questions, really around the title that we've chosen, which is around changing it, and changing it sustainably. So by way of an introduction, all I would say, because I want to get on to what the panelists have to say, if you take management guru like Peter Drucker from many years back, he would have said, or he's supposed to have said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Actually, he never said that, but people have used it, and I've got a personal favorite, which is the author Edgar Schein, who said that culture determines and limits strategy, which is not so catchy, probably didn't sell many books, but it actually is probably true. And I think the power of culture is important for us as a business, because the behavioral aspects of the things you'll hear about today are as important as the techniques and the methodologies. Anyway, enough of me. what I'd like to suggest is that the panelists warm up a little bit by just using sort of culture as a way of introducing themselves and their organisation. So the question I'm going to put to them, quite simply, is what do they understand by the term culture, the word culture, but more importantly, how they would define the cultures of their organisations. So as a sort of way of introducing the topic. So Ali, if you want to start us off.
So I think culture really is who you are as an organization. Just as individuals have personalities, each individual is different. You know, some individuals are high in empathy, some are not, some are people-centric, some are not, some are aggressive, some are soft-spoken, some are thoughtful, some are instinctive. So I think just as individuals have personality, over a period of time, organizations also develop a personality. I think especially young organizations, the culture is largely driven by founders and a few influential leaders. But as organizations grow large and over a period of time, you know, over a large organization like IBM with a long history. So I think culture takes root over decades, and it really determines what the organization is, who you are as an organization, what's the organization's personality. So I think that briefly to me is culture, who you are as an organization, what you are.
Thank you. Ruchi.
I'll start with your second question about how culture is manifested in the organization that I'm working in. So for that, I just have to introduce Pune City Connect. That's the organization I'm working with. We are a non-profit, and the mandate really is to try and enable social development to happen in a transformational way rather than an incremental way. So essentially, the state at which cities and villages in our country are today, the nature of problems is so complex and they are so interlinked that the kind of solutioning that is required is required at a different level. And we can see all around us that actually there is incremental change happening, but basics are not changing. So our solution to this is really to try and enable in a particular geography, sustainable change happening at scale, so that one sort of sets off a few structured trigger points, but then it should be enough that one can actually sit back and emergence, the multiplier effect and interlinkages and individuals will actually take over in order to transform. And I'm a strong believer in inflection points, that if 20% of the population gets transformed, then it can actually be a trigger for the rest. And what is culture? Culture is basically the dominant set of behavioral actions. Those can get changed. So Pune City Connect really therefore works, how does one make scale happen, and that too sustainably. So one very important stakeholder is the government. And in the social sector, unfortunately, there are very less public-private partnerships that happen because there's a lack of trust and credibility as far as the government is concerned. So Pune City Connect has a very stable set of, board who are industrialists, and so they are trusted, and it acts as an interface. And we essentially facilitate government coming in with capital expenditure, policy level changes, and other kinds of non-monetary resources, and corporates coming in with corporate social responsibility funds to enable scale development to happen. So in education, we are working with 200 schools, doing mass scale capacity building of teachers. In the livelihood space, we are setting up these centers called the lighthouses, where the PMC puts in the capex, the space, and all the refurbishment, and and they run with the help of corporate social responsibility funds. And in digital literacy, the objective is 100% digital literacy across the city of Pune by 2020. Already 28 centers are set up and 22,000 people have been trained. So that's the nature of the partnership. So enabling other stakeholders, so government, corporates, citizens through volunteering, and NGOs, though I won't go into the details, but that's essentially the model. So the implication on culture is huge. So this mandate is just 2 years old. It's operating in that sense like a startup. And the default culture is basically one of a huge diversity, because there's a paucity of funds. So one has a motley crew, really. So it's people from all kinds of different backgrounds. So some have social sector backgrounds, some are coming in with, the layman's worldview and perspectives. In terms of age, unfortunately, gender diversity is not much. It's mostly women. And in fact, one of the things to work on is, that for the few men who are there, how to enable a culture where they can also thrive. The other default culture is that of huge stress and pressure. Because of low funds, therefore always there's the team size is too small, stretch bandwidth, sense of urgency, huge mission out there. So, that's the second aspect. And so it is very important to consciously set a culture. And my 3 mantras for conscious setting of sustainable culture is ownership by employees. It has to flow from the top and persevere. So these are really the 3 things. By nature of ownership, we've done like a co-visioning, mission, values exercise, creation of reflective spaces so that people can be reflective practitioners and be able to take a step back. And I think I'll stop there, but these are 3 things we're trying to put in place.
Lovely passion. Don't need to steal the passion. And thank you, Ruchi. So, Magasa.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I work for UNICEF. I don't know if you know what UNICEF is. It's the United Nations.
Probably do.
Right. United Nations Children Fund, and which is part of the United Nations organization, and the UN basically was established in 1945. Basically, and 1945 is a key date in our history as human being, end of the Second World War, with the vision of making the world a better place for each and every one. So our work and our mandate as United Nations Children Fund is to advocate for the right of the children, wherever they are, whether they are in Iraq, whether they are in Syria, under the bombs, whether they are in the US or India, everywhere where children are, we want to make sure that, their rights are respected, that, they are given every opportunity to thrive, to really realize their full potential. So this is where we're coming from. And now talking about culture, as my friend said, is about the personality of every organization. Organizations are like human beings, right? And such as human beings have personality, organizations have personalities. But the personality of the organization must be aligned with the strategic vision of that organization. And this is where the UN comes from. The UN is hoping, and our goal basically is to make sure that whatever happened in the past never happens again. And that's why we are working to make sure that the world is a place where there is security. So we advocate and we work for peace and security. We want to make sure that social development is everywhere, and and this is where the diversity and inclusion is important. But the challenge as an organization is that the UN is part of the government as well, right? So you have 194 countries that are member of a single body, and that are part of that body, and that are also driving anything that is happening in that body. So where we take our values from, and culture is about values basically. It's about our behavior, it's about our deep belief, what we think is right or not right, and what are the social norms that we have established that can really drive our force to achieve results. So we take our values, which are central to our culture, in the UN Charter. If you have read the UN Charter, the preamble of the UN Charter talks about tolerance, talk about promotion of human rights, equality between countries, whether they are big or small, and that's why if you look at the General Assembly, all the countries are the same, whether it's United States, whether it's India or Nepal, or a small country like Malawi or Papua New Guinea, they all have one voice, right? So that platform brings the inclusiveness. In the Article 101 of the UN Charter, it promotes diversity, but also independence and impartiality, and making sure that every staff members of the United Nations upholds the highest level of integrity and independence. So what what we do is when we hire a staff, then we make sure that that's, the values of that staff members is aligned with the values of the organization. And the first thing we do is to have the staff members sign what we call declaration of loyalty. And that declaration of loyalty, if I have a few seconds, I will I can read it for you. It is quite interesting. What it says, let me just a second. No, it's fine. Thank you very much. So the declaration of loyalty, it says, I solemnly declare and promise to exercise in all loyalty, discretion, and conscience the functions entrusted to me as an international civil servant of the United Nations, to discharge these functions and regulate my conduct with the interests of the United Nations only in view, and not to seek or accept instructions in regards to the performance of my duties from any government or other sources external to the organization. I also solemnly declare to promise to respect the obligations incumbent upon me as set out in the staff regulations and rules. So every staff member we hire must take that oath. Once you take that, then it sets the scene for all the things. Of course, we have other mechanisms in place to make sure that the culture is really promoted and is monitored and making sure that it produces results.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay. So, I'm going to come back to you on some of those points in another question. So, Samir.
Well, it's always tough to be after the United Nations. Speaking about us, we are a pure play analytics and artificial intelligence service provider, a company which was formed in 2000,
Not anymore.
Way back 17 years old. But I think one of the very crucial aspects we've lived throughout our, I would say, working days is in God we trust, rest everyone must bring data. And that's been an adage with us, with which we've been working. And I think when we have close to about 1,500 professionals, and these are the professionals from top Ivy League, IITIMs, premier institutes in India and abroad. Also, we have an interesting mix of what we say creative guys from advertising agencies, social anthropologists, and a lot of diverse talent. I think one of the key aspects of the culture is how do you be a first among equals? Because the intellectual bandwidth and the capability amongst that entire workforce is this much. And the whole aspect of that culture thrives on what's the kind of an impact you're making for the clients. An impact is just not creating what we say a jazzed up algorithm, which is path defining or really kind of interesting for any organization to pick up and make kind of, let's say, huge, I would say, impact. But it's all about when the algorithm gets done, when it goes into the market, when it goes into any organization, what's the impact it's making back for the client. And another aspect about our organization culture is we have to practice what we preach. Every aspect of human talent, the whole spectrum of life cycles, right from talent acquisition to talent engagement to even comp and benefit, is all measured by analytics, which also means that eventually all the decision making is through what we are trying to define through analytics. So that's in a nutshell what we are.
Perfect. So I can think you will appreciate that it's a very diverse panel, so they're all coming from very different perspectives. So I've got some individual questions to ask the panelists based on their background and some of their answers already. So Adi, I'm going to start with you. Obviously you have a very unique understanding of startups, and we can see that from your profile. So the challenge that I perceive is with startups, you start from nothing culturally. So in your view, how, if you can you influence a culture from a startup? If you can, is the title that we're looking at today. So what kind of factors do you need to think about as a founder when culture is put on the table?
A great question. So I'll just start with an example of how culture was set up in a startup. So this is about a company called Digital Equipment Corporation. This was there in the 1970s. So this was started by a person called Ken Olsen. He was the founder. So So the founder's basic belief was that we are building products for smart users, not for the dumb users. And to build products for smart users, we need to hire smart people. If we need to hire and retain smart people, we need to give them a lot of freedom to discuss and debate and take decisions. So even as a CEO or a founder, I can't impose my decision. That was the culture of the organization. Free debate, free discussion, no imposition. And that worked extremely well at some point of time. So they built great products. DEC was a great company. But at some point of time, IBM launched a PC for the dumb users, not for the smart users. And that became a great success after Microsoft OS was operating on the IBM PC. And DEC had to respond in some way because the market share was being eaten away. And they tried in all ways, but they couldn't come up with a single product because 4 engineering managers came up with 4 different products. The CEO couldn't impose, what was the right one to go to the market with. So all 4 engineering managers went with 4 different products to the marketplace, all with their own bells and whistles, in their own fashion. None of them succeeded. The entire, the 4 products bombed. And digital as a company itself was on a downturn after that. It was acquired by Compaq. So the point I'm making here is that there is no right or wrong culture. Just as there is no right or wrong personality, it depends upon the circumstances. At some point of time, your culture may be extremely helpful in succeeding. At some other point of time, when circumstances change, it may not be relevant for success. And it's not possible for DEC to become an IB. So companies perish when their cultures are no longer relevant to what is required at the marketplace. So with that background, let me just tell you, in startups, culture equals founders. That really is the formula. So founders play a very important role in setting up culture. So the culture of a startup is really who the founders are, where they come from, what's their background, what are their beliefs, what are they passionate about. That really is the culture of a startup. And over a period of time, the company also hires a few senior leaders. Some of the more influential and articulate leaders also begin to influence culture. So culture in a startup, to my mind, is much more easy to influence and change than in much larger companies. Having said that, I think culture is something which is actually very difficult to change, and that's the reason why most change programs fail. Change management programs are really about attempts to change the culture, and therefore 95% of them really fail. But if you really think that you can influence culture, I think startups are the place because they are small. You can influence the founders to think a little bit differently. And the founders are still around and active in executive roles. So I think startups are a place where you do have the ability to still make some changes.
Perfect, thank you for that. So really good points. Now, Ruchi, I'm going to sort of ask you to build a little bit on what you were describing before. So I'm aware of your sort of CSR, social impact type background, but you're also in some respects a startup as well. So my question to you is it possible to change people's mindset?
Thank you. So there are many facets to the response to that question, but I'm going to focus on only one because I believe that's the most important and also keeping the time in mind. And that is the aspect of values, as you mentioned as well. So I feel, we work on a 3-circle design model for social transformation. So the central circle is about the technical solutions. Okay, you're running an English teaching program and people are learning English. The second circle focuses on system change. That what is the mindset change, cultural change that needs to happen. But the third circle is that of the space of values. That what are the values that you're working from, that you want to manifest in your actions and that you want to engender in the entire ecosystem that you're working with. And when one is working from the space of values, then the change is sustainable because there's inner transformation that happens. So I'll just give one example of this. So for example, so our values, which have been co-designed with the entire team, there are 4. There's courage, inclusion, integrity, and empathy. And across all our tracks, essentially the idea is about role modeling those values in whatever we as a team are doing, reflecting on those and therefore reinforcing, but also finding a space of resonance with the people that we are working with. So, for example, in the Lighthouse, which is the track where we do sustainable livelihood development. So the youth, enrolled from slum communities, and our whole, first of all, the structure of the program is that for the first 1 month, they do not even decide about the skilling program. It's only about agency building, building their own ability to feel that they can determine their own future and figure out how to do it. So it's about self-expression, there's music, dance, drama, etc. So that's one part of it. But the example I want to give you is about one boy called Yogendra. So Yogendra has a speech disability because he has a thick tongue. And he was always basically rejected right from the time that he's grown up. Also his father deserted them, so it's him and his mother. And his mother, in fact, had a heart attack around 10 years back. She's right now 50 because of the stress of having to figure out how to provide, etc. So when Yogendra came to the lighthouse, then the thing that distinguishes the lighthouse from other programs is its culture. So it's a safe space. So whether a person is a gangster, whether a person is somebody like Yogendra, but they can be themselves and they're accepted for who they are. So Yogendra for the first time found a peer group and friends, because for example, there was somebody who had, who couldn't stand, and we were doing a garba in the, all the youth were doing garba, and she was on her knees, and the youth suddenly saw it, and they all fell to their knees, and the entire garba was done on the knees. So that is the kind of inclusion and the kind of safe space that people find when they arrive here. So one is he got that, and so he got the courage to start enrolling, and he did a data entry course. And after that, he went for some 16 interviews and got rejected. But the value of courage and resilience, so he kept trying, and then he got accepted in this place called Nyansa, where he does scanning of documents. But because of his inability to be able to actually forge relationships and merge into the working environment, he was finding it's a fight or flight instinct, and he wanted to fly, which happens with a lot of youth who get scared and they go into intimidating atmospheres. So we therefore decided that we'll see if he can get individual counseling, arranged for that. And because of the nature of this partnership, and because the managers had also come to the lighthouse, his manager decided to come for that first counseling session. And you won't believe it, the manager completely understood what is going wrong, and not only have they retained Yogendra, but they are sponsoring 1 year of counseling for him. So I'm saying this story because it's about, one, working from a set of values, that is engendering a space where a person can find themselves. Secondly, for that person to experience those values, and thirdly, for the rest of the ecosystem also to start working from it. And that is what sustainable change is about, and that's what the culture is, manifestation of behaviors from these set of values. So I feel, in fact, that's the unique aspect about transformation, that A, it has to be at scale, but B, it also has to be at micro level. It has to change every individual, and individuals are then those who go out there and make scale happen.
Perfect, thank you for that. Great example. So using your point on scale, the question I'm going to ask Magasa with his points around the United Nations, the sheer size of it, and also UNICEF as part of it, all these governments. So the question is around culture and scale. So can you, with that organization, even if we just take UNICEF in India, so not everything, what can you as an organization do to change your culture?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think changing the culture requires first to have a clear vision of where we want to be. Understanding what we want to achieve as an organization. First, I think we have a clear mandate, and to achieve that mandate, what do we need, as an organization, and who do we need to be, and what kind of, competencies and resources do we need to be there, and then understanding the current state. Because I think, knowing the vision, having a clear vision, and projecting where we want to be, where we want to go, and then understanding where we are currently. And that's the challenge, because most of the time, I think we don't really have clear evidence on what type of culture we are operating in, because it's the collective, behavior of people coming from different backgrounds, and I'm coming from Africa. I'm working with people who are coming from different places, and we've grown up, in different environment with different belief systems, etc. And then we come into, one organization where we are supposed to behave the same way. So embracing new values that become part of our personality, and then become like the personality of the organization. That is the challenge, right? How do you make sure that people coming from different backgrounds, with different beliefs, who have grown up in different environment, have different experiences, work together to achieve a common goal, which is promoting the right of the children. So what we did in the UN is to understand what is common to all of us. What should be our common value. And we came up with 3 core values that each and every single staff members must embrace, which is integrity, diversity, and inclusion, and commitment. Commitment is important, because if you want to achieve results for children, if you want to transform the world and making the world a better place for children, you need to be committed. And this is not a place where you come to make money, right? We know that money is part of, you need money to really survive, but you don't join the United Nations, you don't join UNICEF because you want to make money. And if that's the case, then there is a clear disconnect between your personal values and the values of the organization. And as a result, we have many staff members who join and then they say, okay, this is not the place for me, basically. I'm not here to work and put my life at risk. I work in situations where there is active conflict and where stray bullets land on my table, but I'm still there, because I believe this is where the children need us the most. So though that level of commitment needs to be there, if we don't have that, then there's no place for you, in UNICEF. So what we do is to make sure that every single staff member that we hire has those values. And then we monitor that. In our performance appraisal system, we look at those aspects. And the other thing that we did is to look at our different functions and see what are the type of behaviors and competencies that are required, depending on the type of function, depending on the level of responsibilities in the organization. And we monitor how the staff member demonstrate those competencies on a daily basis, and we provide support to improve them when we feel like there are gaps or there are rooms for improvement. But it takes time.
Okay, perfect. So this is the last question. I'm going to build up on what Magas has said, because for Samir, given his background in analytics, the question is measurement. So after all of the discussions that have been had, culture does come out as a rather intangible thing. But your expertise is actually in measuring things and recording things. So how can the world of analytics help us with culture change?
I think it's quite pertinent in terms of what you asked, Steve, because there is a very perceptible change which is happening in terms of what we say. If we take a future forward stance, we're talking about a huge transformation wave happening, and this was again discussed in the first panel discussion. We're talking about organizations shifting their strategies in terms of how they should reimagine the customer experience, keep the whole talent piece away from what we say strategy, but very involved in terms of execution, and also a piece around how do we innovate, do a change management. Now the fact, if we take today, organizations, it's a fact today, analytics and AI is #1 agenda for a CXO today. If we take also the human talent analytics side, the market size today is close to about $60 billion. And the sum total of the CAGR in terms of the growth which is happening in human talent analytics consumption is the fastest amongst all the functions put together. Sales, marketing, supply chain, operations,
aside. Now, when it comes to as part of subsuming culture or organizational values, I think one of the key pertinent aspect a human talent head is facing, which is a challenge as well. How do you start personalizing the experience within the organization, which is unique and highly recommended only for me, which is what we say persona. Personas are built for the employees, which are customized. Take an example today. Many of you are using Netflix. Netflix has a recommendation for each and every user in terms of the various genre of movies, what you would like to see, I would like to see, or Steve would like to see. And it's all different. It's bases the consumption pattern or our optics in terms of what we view. Think of this organization, 100,000 employees. It's very difficult to imbibe those values, cultures, mission. But at the same time, there is always that expectation by the human talent and employee, look, I need something for which I'm here for. Which is where what we say that if you start building personas around the human talent, which is the sum total of their behaviors, and as human beings, we always say we are predictably irrational. While Monica mentioned about 35,000 decisions, but many of those decisions are still taken by hunch, gut, and intuition. What if the algorithm starts reversing that and saying algorithms will start taking decisions for each and every one, which means your decision making will be different from mine if I know how algorithms will work for me. Which is where what we're trying to say as part of this whole organizational cultural change is, let's have a persona around each and every human talent in terms of their aspirations, and what they need to be calibrated against. That goes as a feed in the system where I can see where I am versus where anyone else. And what matters to me is, for the sake of materiality, is my progression, my aspiration, and where I would like to land. And that's the whole, what we say, algorithmic nature of decision making, which will change the future of workplace.
Perfect. So the future, the future's out there. So we're all going to be, predicted. I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to open it up to questions. So apologies if you do have questions to panel members. Obviously, coffee will be a great time to do that. I'm going to hand on to Monica.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for a great discussion. I just wanted to keep on hearing more, and I love the questions, Steve, and I love the answers. So, Andre, can you just come and hand over the books? And Steve, we need a group picture.
Oh, I mean the group.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Steve, you don't get a book.
Yeah, I don't get a book. Group photo, yeah? No book for me.
Okay, that brings us to the last panel discussion. Andre will moderate the topic, linking value creation and performance to talent. So I'd now like to welcome Radha Srinivas, HR Director. She leads the HR Business Partner Team for India, Global Sales Organization, Asia Pacific, and also LinkedIn Marketing Solutions, Asia Pacific. I'd like to invite Savita Shivsankar, she heads HR for Novartis India. Aniruddha Khekare, Group Director, Human Resources, Emerson Automation Solutions. Anita Tripathi, Board of Directors, Cognitive Care and Airfolk Life Sciences. And last but not the least, Amit Vaish, Head HR, Barclays Technology Center.
Okay. If you look at the topic that we want to address, it talks about talent and it talks about value. Now, if you look at all the discussions up till now, all these things are integrated, whether you're talking about unconscious bias, because within that is a perception of who's talent and who is not talent. If you look at organization culture and the way you view talent and how you liberate talent, it's all linked. So the section that I'm going to cover right now is around this talent value equation. I have a few questions, but what I'd like to suggest, I'm going to change the process a little bit. I'm going to ask each panelist, and if it's okay with you, one question, yeah? And then take it from there. And what I suspect is that we'll feed off the other question, the answers, and ask more questions if relevant, yeah? Okay, so the first one, and I'm going to go in a sequence. Unfortunately, who's first closest to me gets the first question. And so the first question is around the world we're in today. It's fast, it's visual, it's complex. It's not only in India, it's in every context, in every company. There's just a fundamental way and change, whether it's in an NGO, whether it's in government, the speed is unbelievable. So the first question is around potential, because the first thing when you talk about talent, you think about the word potential. So the question is, can you truly identify potential in an ever-changing world context? Not an easy question.
Sure, start with the tough one. Gosh, so we do wrestle with potential and the concept of potential a lot because there's some great degree of subjectivity associated with it. I mean, there are a few standard definitions, but at the end of the day, a lot of the factors that were discussed earlier actually play into how you look at potential, right? Like bias plays into it, culture fit plays into perception of potential. A person's life circumstances play into potential. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. So I think the way we at LinkedIn have sort of thought about this problem is we say, first we try to take away the notion that potential is not changeable. Some of the previous organizations I've worked at, once you were sort of put into a certain potential bucket, it was really hard to move out of that. But here we really think about it's a really temporary state. We talk about things like a tour of duty, and a tour of duty can actually redefine the potential that you bring to the table, for example. So I think to your question, like how hard is it and is it truly identifiable? I think it's a state of time, and it revolves around the tour of duty that you're actually accomplishing in the moment and whether or not your potential can address that tour of duty, and it depends on sort of the aspiration of where you're trying to go to. So what I would suggest, at least the way we are thinking about it, is potential is something that's a moving target, and it's defined by the state that you occupy in that space.
Brilliant. So the emphasis that the potential oscillates depending on context and situation. So let's park that as practitioners and professionals, because we come from the world where potential is fixed. It can't be the same. The world is changing too quick. Interestingly, we were with a company yesterday, and that was one of the questions that they alluded to, is around things are changing so quick. You know, this guy was the best potential individual 3 years ago. He's dropped down the ranks. Now, how's that possible? Okay, what has changed? Okay, next question. So, if you had a pharaoh in Egypt, and if he had a son, and the pharaoh died, who got the job? His son, right? That's how it normally works. If you have a president, and there's some dynamics in Africa at the moment, in Zimbabwe, we have a president who's 93 years old and has been there more than 30 years. There's no clear succession in that situation. If a president dies, normally the deputy president will take over. So from Donald Trump, you know, the next one will take over. So the question is around succession. What should succession achieve in organizations?
Take this. So there are a couple of precursors to that question. Because succession in itself is not the end objective, obviously. You also stated context, saying you really don't know what the future is like. And I was reading recently that in the last 10 years, there are more jobs that have got created today that we never heard of. 10 years ago, when I was studying human resources, many years ago, I had no idea what an app developer means. Forget about app developer, I didn't know what an app means. So there is an assumption here that organizations know what we are creating succession for. So that's the first one. the easiest answer would be to probably say future readiness. But when you don't know what is the future, what are you readying yourself for? So that's the question I keep asking myself. And hence, I've often thought that what we're trying to do is probably use a trick methodology to bypass this problem. What you cannot create is talent for the future, because I don't know what the future is. You got to admit that first. You can create an ecosystem that would be attractive for all kinds of talent to stay. And I want you to just stay with me for a moment here. I think the only science that human resources probably needs to study a bit more, and probably should be a core subject now, is sociology. Because what is reflective in organizations in about a year and a half is available in the society, as a precursor. So there are lead indicators in society for societal changes, in the way external people analytics are changing, that have reflections of what will be the workforce of the future. And you will have an organizational context that exists in that workforce. Hopefully, I work for pharma. We're told that the next wave of medicine will come from the IT sector. All right? So the point is that what you need to do is to have an ecosystem where the next wave of talent can actually survive and thrive. So therefore, while your question was succession, my answer is culture. Because I think succession is a route to being successful at a point in time. But the methodology to get there is probably not potential identification. We do all of that, but it has much more relevance in a 2 to 3 year framework than a 5 to 10. Okay, but I think the longer answer to this is, in a very convoluted way, that succession planning hopefully should lead to future readiness, but culture will be the route.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, the emphasis I'm getting out of that comment is that it's not succession is part of a broader process. It's not an outcome.
Yeah.
As an HR profession, globally, there's an obsession with succession. And there's an industry that underpins that. And we are focused so much around what they call pipeline and who fills what box next. There's a broader ecosystem and culture around what does your CEO want. Yes, succession is important. You have a list. He has a list. Or she has a list. You see my unconscious bias comes out this way. He as CEO is male. That's an innocent bias, yeah. And if you compare the two lists, the list will differ maybe. Because there's no consensus around what succession means. Okay, next question. McKinsey wrote an article 17 years ago. We still refer to it as HR professionals today. It's a reference point. The war for talent. You all heard that, the HR guy? Yeah, okay. It's around here in India too now. The war for talent. And that's an external war, yeah? And the question I have, in today's context, is it an external war for talent or an internal war for talent that drive value?
I think it's a bit of both. See, the definition of value in an organization has changed. When I started as a business head, it was revenue and margins, then it was employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction, added to employee and margin. Now it's about brand equity, it's about the ability to create disruptive innovation. It's about delivering change and transformation to the industry that you're focused on. So obviously, you need to get talent that can achieve some of these values. So there is not one versus the other. I think there is one aided by the other. Obviously, the war of value needs the right talent, whether you can groom them internally, find them from external sources. And Amazon is going to get into the clinical trials business, and they are going to be disruptive. So as Savita was saying, you might use artificial intelligence to look at the DNA profile and say what kind of drugs will affect this kind of a cancer, but it'll be a mix. There is no straight answer to it. You'll take the internal guys, you will adopt them to open their minds to using technology and disruption. You'll have to get disruptive leaders who can think very differently. And that's going to be a paradigm shift. I always say this in many panels, I've said this, it's adapt or die. Dinosaurs are extinct now. Why did they go extinct? They did not adapt. Industries and organizations that are going to adapt are going to survive. Industries and organizations that are going to deliver the newfangled values are going to survive, and the talent that can deliver those values are going to be the talent that you go after. You have to groom people internally, and that requires a lot of culture change as well, to the previous discussion. And you have to get people from outside who can think very differently. So it's both together, one aided by the other, to bring in the value, aided by the talent, both internal and external.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So just a caveat. The last 10, 15 years has been on a very, very hard focus effort around the external component. And the whole shift now is around what do we do with the internal talent that need to drive a better outcome for that organization. The challenge is HR. We haven't perfected that map yet, not yet, because it's not easy to do. So I like the concept talent value link, and for many reasons. The talent value link is not an easy thing for the HR fraternity globally to do. And there's many reasons for that, okay? But there is a shift. There's a bigger ask now around, show me this link. Which brings me to my next question. And it's very expensive to run a talent management program. There's the salaries, there's the benefits, there's the shares that people get, there's the bonuses, the extra development, INSEAD, London Business School, very, very costly exercise, yeah. The other side is the return on investment. So it'd be really interesting to hear your organization's approach and how you balance the two, because the CEO is really on the ROI side, not the input side, yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. So I think this is a topic which pretty much has been at the front and center for the last 2 decades at least that I've been in HR. How do you demonstrate and measure return on investment on talent initiatives? And I think while we struggle for answers in the early part, I think organizations have progressively gotten better at doing it. And it's not just through tools and through measurements, which are of course the hard part, and you can obviously create metrics around retention or attrition or engagement or what have you to show how it has benefited the organization in a tangible sense. But equally, I think in equally in trying to create a compelling brand for the organization, which I think is really the proof of all talent investments or human capital initiatives that you may be driving. At the end of the day, I think if your talent agenda and programs can create a brand that is differentiated, that is authentic, and that is compelling, I think you've done a great job as far as driving talent agenda the organization is concerned. And that in no unequal terms will result in your ability to attract talent, to retain them, to grow them, and to feed into succession pipelines or leadership roles of the future and create sustainable value. So I think there is a way to do it, and organizations have progressively gotten better at doing it.
Yeah, I endorse around the intangibles around the talent program. You can't always put a cost on everything. That's what the CEO wants, by the way, all the time. Tell me what the benefit, what the costs are. There has to be at some point an acceptance that there's an intangible. Okay, the last question, and I'd like to ask the question, but also give the other panelists a chance to support each other on this one. Yeah, it's if you were to take one talent metric within the talent universe globally, in India, wherever, what would be the #1 indicator of success in the talent program?
All right. I think perhaps I would look at two, not just the one. One is obviously, very clearly your market share. If you are growing as a company, if you are creating greater value and giving better returns to the stakeholder. If you're not doing that as a company, whatever you do in talent management space is not helping you. And I'll tell you why. I work for a company which is giving just as a performance parameter from a stakeholder or a shareholder perspective, is that it's paying increased dividend for last more than 60 years to its shareholder. So that's the sustained performance. Now that's the external world. Growth has always been there, market share has always been there, increasing. Internally, if you look at it, our 85% of our jobs, leadership jobs, gets filled within. I don't even remember if we have hired a director or even associate director externally to run this company. This company has been there for 140 years, an extremely successful company to an extent where today we are ahead of the times, and we have the best IIoT thing available. So I'm talking about the success, how it is linked with and that is deeply rooted into the talent management program that we run for this company. Third parameter is obviously the retention. The leadership talent that we have, there is a zero attrition, close to zero. And the hypothesis to us that we have, we have, let's say, on a group of 85,000 people, maybe about 6,000 people globally, and there must be 98% plus retention in that, years together. So why I'm saying, giving all these numbers, is again, end of the day, we live in practical world, right? A company is successful only if it is making money, only if it is giving back to the shareholders, only if it is giving back to the society, only if it is, making, life better. So like I said, the first parameter is obviously the market share and the shareholder value that you create. And the second, what value you are creating for the employees. Are they looking forward to be with you, for longer term? Having said that, this is not a company which, we will continue to do what it is supposed to do. Every year, 33% of this company new, sales comes from new products. So which means it's constantly innovating. So that's the third dimension. So perhaps the three elements, and I feel that there is a lot of work that happens at the talent management and talent development level, which helps us to get there.
Brilliant. So I really like the way you put the four out, okay? So when you talk about retention, internal promotion and that, those things result in market share. Really. And that's the emphasis I'd like to leave everybody with around. There are what I call base metrics or base measures, and they're the real fundamental shifters for your organization metrics. Interesting, and I'd like to come to the other panels. I'd like to tell a little story before I get there. In February last year, I started the organization, and one of the very first companies I visited to just kind of find out how they do things, what they're all about, was an insurance company. And first of all, they've had 5 talent directors in 5 years. Suspicious, yeah. Immediately, something's going on. It's not right. We all know that. HR professionals, business professionals. Every year, every 12 months, revolving door. And we got into the talent discussion. In fact, there's a story in the book I write as well, yeah? And we got into the talent, what do they do in talent management in the organization? And the head of the division HR started to explain about 5-6 weeks in advance, they start gathering data. What do you mean gather data? No, they don't have systems that can give them information on talent. So now there's 2 issues now. There's a system, and they need metrics, yeah? And they can't find them. They can't get the data for the metrics. Like, oh my word, okay, now I understand why you're looking for number 6, yeah? And as the story evolves, and as he's speaking, I'm starting to come to realization that talent management in that organization is around metrics, pure metrics, okay? Around gender, around who got promoted recently, around your grade, your job grade. And they put all this data into something, and they present it to the senior team of the organization. Not once did they talk about market share. Not one. It was unbelievable. Take that story and generalize it, because it's indicative of a lot of where we are. Okay. Any of the other panelists would like to comment on the one metric?
Sure.
Please give us your secret. Yeah.
So I just slightly counter perspective, I guess, because I come from a very agile industry where
if you aren't actually moving around reasonably rapidly, you can become a dinosaur very fast, right? Silicon Valley companies are on the edge of that innovational cusp, mainly because there is actually a lot of talent agility in the marketplace. And it's very fascinating. It actually first surprised me when I moved into this kind of environment, because I came from a retail organization where longevity and low turnover and sort of high tenure resulted in a lot of value creation for the company and market share. However, I don't know that they were able to be as successful in the level of innovation that I have seen in the Silicon Valley based companies. I won't say innovation didn't exist. I would say just the value or the kind of innovation that you see in a Silicon Valley company is, I would say, 10x. Some of the innovation fails, some of it is successful, but the success is astounding when it happens. And for me, it was sort of interesting to stop and even think about what does that mean? What does tenure in an organization mean? So I don't know that I have one specific metric I can go after. I love the idea of saying, hey, it's about the value creation and market share, because I think that's a very tangible, business-oriented outcome. However, the underlying metrics underneath it are interesting because I think we achieve some of that with talent agility. In fact, we talk about transformation. We talk about active experiences. And it's surprising to me how free and open people are about transformative experiences. If you are going to leave LinkedIn, you transform yourself into something even more amazing. So you drive personal value as well for your career, for your journey. And what we have observed, at least when we look at all of our data, and we see these patterns around the globe of just how skills are transferring, they are these transformational shifts that are happening in the industry. So, you can see, we can see maps of how skill sets have completely evolved because of these kinds of experiences. So I think it's a different nuance to this idea of like, what is it that actually drives talent agility?
There are the intangibles. And then there's us in HR around how we liberate people, the nurture. Because there's a value and there's a nurture. Excellent. If we can just take the one more response and then we move on. Thank you very much.
One thing that I have been consciously measuring is the talent brand in the market. Are we attractive enough for people out in the market to be employed by us? Especially when you do M&A and you acquire 3 companies, you're integrating them, you don't have a brand identity. Essentially, you create that brand identity and conscious work on measuring your talent brand. That is very, very critical for a sector that is emerging, a sector that is sunrise and growing very fast, to have that brand equity. That's something other than the regular, employee engagement, attrition, and other things that you measure. That talent brand is very important, because when I integrated these 3 companies that Inventive acquired, and I used to recruit people. Do you know Inventive? No. Do you know i3? Yes. Do you know Pharmanet? By the way, we just acquired them. So you need to create your identity, and that identity needs to be attractive. And one of the measures for the talent brand we were measuring internally is what percentage of our employees are getting recruited through internal referrals. We used to have 33% internal referrals, which means if you're not happy with the organization, you will not refer your friend to come and work for you. You see the social media, Glassdoor reviews and all, but you need to have that, the brand, talent brand, you need to measure constantly.
I'll just add another dimension to this, Sanjeev, very quickly. Which is, while a lot of the traditional talent metrics tend to be inward-looking, right? So engagement, attrition, cost, productivity, etc. They're all great, but they're largely inward-looking. Your customer wouldn't really worry so much about, what your productivity, etc. It's all great to run an efficient shop. But I think if you really put your customer or client at the center of how they are willing to reward your talent for what the value it creates, I think in services organizations particularly, revenue per employee is a very powerful metric, because it means that from an organization's perspective, I can earn much more on the same resource, and from a client's perspective, I'm willing to pay you much more for the value that you bring to the same individual resource. So I think revenue per employee to me is a very powerful way of demonstrating what value a resource is actually able to deliver in a market context.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I split it into two, the answer. Just think about your lead indicators and your lag indicators. The lag ones are the ones that you do generically. The lead are kind of what you're getting to. Brilliant, thank you very much. I picked up a lot of insight from you guys, I appreciate that. And I'm sure everybody else has. Okay, moving along. Thank the panelists, really appreciate your time. I wish we had a lot more time, just to talk, yeah? But I'm available at everybody. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Monica. Okay, thank you.
And we distribute the books and we do a group exam.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's hot off the press. It was launched in July.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello again, and welcome back. Hope you feel a bit refreshed. So, what we want to do now is myself and Andre just want to take you through a few of the bits of work that we do at the Human Insights Corporation. So, hopefully you find it informative. We'll ask, you have the opportunity to ask questions a bit later. And what I want to do is I want to follow on from the last panel actually, where there was quite a lot of discussion around the topic of value. And for this, we have a product which is close to my heart, which is around building HR commercial astuteness. Now I'm going to explain a little bit what I mean by that and why I don't use other terms for this particular concept. Now, this phrase comes from, as you can see at the bottom, or some of you can, the 2015 Deloitte Global HR Survey. Now, if you've been in HR for any length of time, like myself, I'm not going to make any assumptions about how long you've been in HR, but I know you're all experienced. Unfortunately, this could have been written 15 or 20 years ago. So therein lies a bit of a challenge for HR, because if you were around, like I was, at the dawn of global HR transformation with Ulrich and Brockbank and all of these good people, they were using these same slides. They were putting in the same challenges to HR that basically HR needs to show up. So it's a little bit disappointing that 15, 20 years later, people like Deloitte are still putting that on our tables, okay? So that's part of the challenge that faces HR still. Because this is the kind of area that we should be occupying. And many of you, based on a lot of the panelists' answers actually, is where you all aspire to be. So what we have to appreciate is that we live in a complex environment, okay? A lot of the ways in which we pick up tools and techniques aren't that good at addressing complexity, okay? And I think with issues around VUCA, if you've heard that expression, around volatility, uncertainty, complexity, etc., we need to be increasingly agile to be able to take these opportunities. We need to understand trends, we need to pick up sort of intelligence around structures and processes. There needs to be a way of looking at skills within the workforce and management. It's a training and it's an innovation agenda. So there's a lot on there, but that's been on there for a long time. So what's getting in the way? What we have in terms of our offer is that we look at HR holistically. So we have a suite of activities that we talk to companies about and we work with them. So we have several frameworks because basically our principle is there is no one solution. If it was that simple, we'd all be there. So we have to have our interventions tailored, customized to what our clients are looking for. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about today is the top one, which is Human Insights HR Legitimacy Ladder. And within this, because of the time we have this morning, I'm going to look at one specific piece. So when we look at the ladder, we look at a maturity profile. And we find the clients we work with are placed all along that spectrum. So, we require, they require different interventions. The one that I'm most interested in today is commercial astuteness, which is a development phase. So it's very difficult, depending on where you are with your HR functions, to really necessarily go straight for this unless you've got some groundwork in place around functional expertise and an appreciation of, or a management of, self-awareness. Okay. So if we've gone through that process, really what we're looking for HR to be is commercially astute, and those are the things that I'm going to tackle now. So what is it? So you can read the words, and the one thing I would say is that regardless of the function you're in, you could replace HR with finance, regulatory, quality, all these things. So it's a functional description. So why haven't I used financial acumen, commercial acumen, business acumen? Well, I'll give you a short story. So my background, so I was educated at Oxford, and my degree was in modern history. So you're going to ask, what use is that to anybody? Okay, but I lovely time at Oxford, 3 years, beautiful, beautiful place to study, lovely subject to understand. So then I became an accountant. So you might ask yourself, what on earth was he doing? Okay, yeah, that lovely education, wasted. My point is, I worked for Unilever for nearly 18 years. My first 10 years in Unilever was as a chartered management accountant. Okay, so I'm a finance guy by background. So what I would say to you is that I have, by dint of training, financial acumen. I've studied it. So there's aspects of that profession that enable me to have a conversation with another person about lots of things to do with financial, whether it's metrics, whether it's trends, whether it's balance sheets, profit and loss, whatever. That does not necessarily mean I have commercial astuteness. Okay, that just means I have financial acumen. So this is not about finance for non-finance managers. So many of you probably in your careers have been on courses, finance for non-finance. I mean, I'd love to purge companies of that particular course, because it really just gives you, what you could buy off the shelf in a bookshop. Okay, what it doesn't give you is a sense of so what. What are you going to do with that? So, as a finance guy by training, who then went into customer management, who then went into HR at the time of Ulrich and Brockbank, so I'm still searching for the Ulrich and Brockbank vision. It gives me a sense of, why I can occupy a seat at the table, why I can be in a room with people who are talking about business issues. And whether it's from a finance perspective, which I also had to do, or a sales perspective, which I also had to do, to then an HR perspective, you're a business partner, and that description covers a multitude of things. So that's really where I'm coming from in terms of what is commercial astuteness and what we think it's about. So again, you can read these things because we think that is one of the critical pieces that enable HR. Many of you are in very senior positions, so this will feel very familiar to you, and you'll have to almost interrogate your own experience to understand what's given you that opportunity, what's given you that place at the table, what keeps you at the table. Okay, and that for us is the question we often have to answer as far as our clients are concerned. Because when we look at CEOs, and some of you occupy that type of role as well, the opportunity is there. I mean, this is a quote from Ram Charan. So it's really important that you seize the opportunity. And again, this doesn't necessarily talk just to HR, this talks to a number of different roles. But I think this type of expectation on the part of the CEO is becoming more and more important. So, we have a number of building blocks. And as you can see from what I've just said, financial acumen is one aspect of it. So it's one constituent part of a bigger challenge around commercial astuteness, but we feel that there are many others, ultimately ending up in the ability to formulate, business-aligned people plans. So that's the destination. So one of the things we do, and what I'm going to show you now, is some aspects of those building blocks. As I say, we've only got a matter of minutes really this morning to go into it. So I'm just going to give you a flavour. But one of the interesting things that we do is we take top 10 concepts. So again, if you're just doing a financial acumen course, what you would do is go into all of those different areas. You would help people understand what that means. But from a financial person, like myself, in terms of my training at least, I know the mechanisms that sit behind those basic building blocks. What we tend to do then is take all of those 10 in the work we do, all of those 10 and put people consequences against those. So we've got case studies where you pick out any one of those 10 building blocks, and you think, well, that's a bit abstract, isn't it? So Ram Charan, I would have shown you the video, but we haven't got time. So one of his kind of stories that he tells is about his sort of his family, his Indian family business in I'm not sure whereabouts it is in India, but it's a shoe shop, and he still owns the shoe shop, and his family have run that shoe shop for decades, and he talks about how he learned about business by being with his family and understanding and growing that business. But one of the big things he talks about is cash. So we had today on the panel, we had, startup. One of the critical things in startup is a lot about cash, and a lot of startups fail when they run out. And you kind of get into the process with HR professionals where you say, well, why should you care about cash? You absolutely have to care about cash. You have to understand where it comes from, you have to understand how you keep it, you have to understand about creditors and debtors, but you have to understand who and what in your organization resolves those conflicts, because they take very different dynamics within any organization to make sure that the cash rolls in. It has cultural implications about how you deal with your suppliers and how you deal with your customers. And that whole dynamic, unless you understand that as an HR professional, you start to risk making poor decisions, or at least advising people in a not such a good way. The other one that's big for me, because I have a very large supply chain experience, so I ran both Unilever's and J&J's supply chain from an HR perspective, so we brought everybody from around the EMEA region at the time, which is Europe, Middle East and Africa, into a hub in Switzerland for both those companies, so it was the same model. So unless you understand as an HR professional why you're doing that, what are the business imperatives that go to making a supply chain tax efficient, Switzerland, good places, and why you do that, and what's at risk. And one of the things, so one of the stories I tell from those experiences is that it costs a huge amount of money to bring, in effect, expats from all over Europe, and they were further afield, into a single location to run, multi-billion pound supply chains. But then you have the conversation with the senior leadership of those organisations, that there are implications to bringing these people into that one location. From a cultural perspective, you're building a new organisation, but also a cost perspective, because they're very expensive. So you already, in that environment, have to have a plan B and a plan C. So most of my conversations when I set up both those organisations was not really about whether the people who were coming were comfortable, well paid, had their schooling sorted out and all these good things. My conversation with the people at the time was, what's the second generation people for this organisation? So when the people who do the jobs now have come and gone, what are you left with? And what do you want to be left with? So culturally, what's coming next? So you have to have some future-proofing, very popular these days to say future-proofing, but what's coming next? You have to be predictive, because we couldn't afford to keep that kind of cost base into 5 and 10 years out. So my job really was to ensure, and back to some of the panel discussions, that the succession was in place to ensure that, let's just say cheaper, but no less talented people were coming through the pipeline and were able to occupy those positions. So the value that HR has the potential to bring is to be predictive, to be looking forward, to saying, well, what are the scenarios, which is usually an activity that's left with finance, you know, or other functions. So they're doing the analysis going forward. HR have to do exactly the same, because that's where some of these costs are put together. We could go into marketing, we could go, absolutely, I think my knowledge of Hindustan Lever, which was, you know, is and was a huge organization within Unilever, one of its unique selling points, certainly within the Unilever network, was its understanding of what it took to manage distribution channels in India. So it's incredibly, you know, loads of case studies around products that sold, you know, billions, because Unilever or Hindustan Lever understood what it took to get products sold in different places. The people aspect of that was, who's going to do it? And what do you need to do to incentivize those people, you know, who are often in very remote locations across the subcontinent? How are you going to motivate those people? And what do you need to do to make sure they do that job well? And how does that look into the future? So all around this set of concepts, you have very, very powerful people implications, and HR need to understand those. The other aspect I would pick up on is having opportunities along the value chain. So I, in my career, have occupied every single one of those positions in the value chain. So, as you said, I've worked in supply chain, I worked in sales, I worked in customer, and I think over time, depending on what your HR development programs look like, and of course this tends to be a you know, manufacturing model, and you could replicate the same for a service model or a hospitality model or a startup in effect. It's all the same eventually. You can interchange certain things, but HR needs to understand what it looks like. You know, they need to have those experiences. So I've spent many years in factories, I've spent many years in corporate environments, I've spent many years working in, you know, functions like R&D, which have their own peculiar cultures. Now you'll all have in your companies sort of equivalents of those, they'll be different. But for HR, to understand what exists in those areas is very important for you to have commercial astuteness, because a decision that's made in terms of your brand mix in customer and consumer will have huge implications further back. So some of the things that we did when I was in Unilever, and I was the category controller for the tea brands in the UK. So you won't know this probably, but you know, in the UK they came up with these pyramid bags to sort of infuse the tea better. Huge investment, millions of pounds of production activity to get those things made. I was sitting up this end of that value chain saying, you know, just do it, you know, just get it done. But you know, the implication being that, you know, if you're HR, you have to understand what the implications of that are at the factory level, because at the factory level, you know, you're asking them to give up 30 or 40 years worth of doing things a certain way, and you were asking them to change that almost overnight. And if you're sitting at the marketing end of this equation, that's like, so. If you're sitting in a manufacturing environment where that's a very localized environment, where the people have worked there for, you know, 30 years and there's a family, you know, loyalty to that production site, it's a very different conversation, and you need to be able to understand what that looks like. So that's another example. Now what this is leading to, and Andre will pick up these thoughts a bit later in his presentation, is getting to the value part. Okay, so in the last panel especially, which is by design, there were lots of points being raised around what value looks like, you know. And so when you take on the left-hand side a very standard P&L, what we're really trying to do is get HR professionals to be commercially curious. So what you have on the right-hand side are not necessarily people questions, but the implications of a lot of those questions have direct impacts in terms of what your people plan might look like. So in terms of sales, in terms of pricing, discounting, incentives, all of those things, largely revenue related items, will have a big impact in terms of what your people plans could be and should be. And my last chart really is just to round up the points. So it's about having a seat at the table. It's about understanding what the levers are that exist within your organizations. And those are the ones there: competency, leadership, culture, etc., because we raised some of those within the panels as well. Are just part, it's not an exhaustive list. There has to be an appreciation of what workforce analysis looks like, so putting the right people in the right place for the long term. There has to be an ability to manage stakeholders. One of the unique benefits of HR is that it manages more stakeholders than most other functions put together. Okay, so its line of sight is very broad, and that's a competitive advantage, if you want to call it that, within any organization. And I fear that HR don't use that sufficiently. Okay, and ultimately, this is where we end up: the people strategy. So I know some people are, professionals within the comp and ben area, also training talent and performance, etc. But we have to bring it back to value, because the situation is such that expertise in HR functions is not enough for a seat at the table. And what we try and advocate is broadening your experiences, broadening your understanding yourself, but also, first and foremost, appreciating that what you do brings value. Okay, so thank you for that. And what I'm going to do now is hand over to Andre.
Any questions?
Oh,
I have a question.
While we say that,
this one you and Andre can answer maybe now or later. I've spent time in organizations like American Express, where I headed sales and handled HR. I'm an executive search consultant now, and I recruit on a regular basis HR professionals. And my firm belief, I'm going to get perhaps beaten up by the HR people here, my firm belief, that stems from the culture of organizations like American Express, is that business people make better HR people or more effective HR leaders than pure HR, which kind of ties up with what you're saying.
Well, okay, so I mean,
it's a provocative statement.
Well, you're preaching to the converted because I'm not an HR person. So, but it's interesting. Why would I say I was an HR person or not? What I think is, I mean, Ulrich and Brockbank, for all of the things that they shouldn't have said, and I'd rather they hadn't said, what they did provoke was exactly what you say. So I wasn't in HR, and then I became an HR person because, and we haven't touched on it today, but there's the term HR business partner, you can extend to finance business partner or quality business partner, whatever. It meant that HR reached into the business and basically said, well, we've got to manage all of these business stakeholders. I can't necessarily be assured that my HR pool at the time, 15, 20 years ago, was able to do that. So we'll bring people in from HR. So companies like, I don't know about American Express, unfortunately, but certainly J&J and Unilever, where I do have a lot of experience, actively bring people through HR function from business. But I'm going to push back on you a little bit. Unfortunately, that's how it's described. You come from the business into HR. HR's in the business. It's just another function within the business. Why is a finance person the business and an HR person not the business? And I think that talks to some of the challenge that we have with the HR credibility.
Corollary to that, does it make sense to break HR into strategic HR and operational HR?
So I just want to address the first question that you had around, it's around why do the business move business people into HR? First of all, why? And if you look at the request from business about the commercial component, but why do they bring them in continuously? And it's about the history and legitimacy of HR. Somewhere along the line, the legitimacy got lost. And everybody's writing about that for the last 5-10 years. The HR has lost its legitimacy. or its credibility is it's average at best. And there's a reason for that. It's the things that HR were engaged in for many years, and the business got tired of that and said, hold on. I want a business person in HR now, because I'm not getting what I need here. So I placed, in my last assignment, in my last role, I placed the head of HR for the Middle East. He was a sales guy who had an HR background. He had an HR qualification. His name was Alex. Alex was one of the best. He ended up, the first year he struggled because his concepts, HR stuff, HR, understanding HR. But Alex brought the commercial lens to HR immediately on his first day. And Alex ended up with, in the J&J system, on a 4.4 rating. And that's like walking on water. It's like the best best rating in J&J you can get. Very, very few people in the world get that rating. But I did that by design because I was just frustrated. I wanted a commercial, value-added HR function. So that was the first thing around why I did that. I think, in retrospect, you still need to bring the HR people in and start with the question. Do you have the commercial ability and do you like HR? No, let me start. Do you like HR? And by the way, do you have commercial? Yeah, you got to start at that thing. Okay, strategic HR and operational HR. I'm not sure if that is two universes actually. I think it's an emphasis in the one, but you do need it. Yeah.
Sorry.
I can see this thing is going to generate a lot of questions, but it's fine. We will work around your needs. Yeah. Good.
So I have a little view on this, and I'll just probably sound it off here. If you go back to the concept of HR, why was it put in place in the first place? Is HR supposed to do HR work? Primarily because a lot of benefits, a lot of issues around humans and the resources that were employed, their protection of their rights, ensuring that there's a platform, somebody understands their issues and puts it back to the management. That's the reason why HR got into picture, for more around protection of employees. Over a period of time, what happened is that everybody started speaking the language, this is not giving any ROI, let's add a commercial acumen. So that the HR business partner kind of a role got into picture, where an HR person sitting with the business, understanding the business needs, going back to the employees and trying to drive something there. So my view is, if we continue to push to say HR, please understand commercial, please understand sales, then have we lost the aspect of HR? On the other hand, if the HR guy continues to use the jargons that HR has been using and forgets about the business strategies, then is that the right approach?
Yeah.
So I've got a view there. And so I also probably want to say, he has put an aspect of saying that a sales guy comes into HR and can be a good performer. I say in HR, if that guy goes into sales, I think it would be a brilliant performer.
So here's a caveat. I agree there needs to be a balance. That's what you're saying. And in some companies, they will not make HR a GM because there's a deep unconscious bias, which is around HR can't do maths. And I'm being facetious, okay? And we're going to touch on this unconscious bias issue and how deep it is rooted around a view. But the view was created by HR on that issue. But yeah, if somebody's spending 90% of their time as an employee activist, I would have a problem with that. I want balance, yeah?
So just add on to this discussion, typically, from a HR metrics point of view, say for example on the L&D. So I used to get a report from my L&D managers, so many man hours and all those, I said, fine, okay, this is what you've done, but I said, what has it impacted in? So for example, if you have spent so many man hours on training, I want to see how has it impacted a business measure, say for example, the net promoter score. Yeah, because there is a direct impact on that one. So I think there is HR, there are the concepts, there are the tools, practices, which is going to be there always. But I think as HR, we need to marry in both. And that's where you kind of show what is the value that HR processes, practices are actually adding value to the business. And that's how also you get a seat at the table, because they know that you are actually supporting them in terms of you're actually enabling them.
Brilliant. So I'm going to leave you with one concept which I want to address later, and then there's a question here. Think about this concept, HR value mapping. And I'm going to introduce you to it later, because it's how, the question is, how do I do that thing? Yeah. Okay.
I think we are really deep into what I would call unconscious bias. Here, I don't think there is really one solution that will fit all. It all depends on what is the strategic goal of the organization, what we want to achieve as a company, as an organization, and how can we get there. If you look at the evolution of HR, a few years back, we're not talking about human resources management, we're talking about personnel administration. It was all process, paying, salaries, employee relations, etc., etc. And then we realized, hey, you can't just do that. You need to be more than that. You need to bring some added value. Then we started talking about human resources management. We went from personnel to understanding that it's all about people. If you want to create value, you need to invest in your people. So there is a change that is happening. So what I'm perceiving is HR is currently at a turning point where we need to look at it from a holistic perspective. It's not just being HR, but it's understanding where the organization or the company is going and how we can support the organization to get there by bringing in talent, by developing them, by maintaining them, but also firing them. Because that's what's important, right? You need to have a clear strategy to get rid of those ones who are not really adding value. So to me, it's looking at it from the perspective that you get a better HR if you are coming from a different background, may not necessarily be the right answer. The right answer is, how do we make sure as an HR that you understand the business and that you can add value using your core knowledge and understanding on how you can develop people, etc., to achieve the results. Taking the example of my organization, right? We've been working for 72 years now, trying to support child rights, promote child rights, etc., etc. But then we realize the world is changing, right? So when you move from one country to another, the business is totally different. The needs of children in Syria are totally different from the needs of children in India, are totally different from the needs of children in the US, etc., etc. But yet, there are commonalities. Child rights is child rights. Now, how do you work with different partners, governments, to make sure that the needs of children are taken into account? And how do you, as HR, bring in the people who can add value in those different settings? The requirements are, of course, completely different. If you're working in an environment where the focus is more on humanitarian assistance, you need a different type of people. If you're working in the settings where it's more about upstream policy, supporting government in designing policies, etc., then you need a different profile. And you can then take it further and tell yourself, in environment where we have, for example, a lot of natural disasters, etc., right? In South India or South Asia, for example, how do you work around that? Now, the one topic that is everywhere is climate change. How do you anticipate that as HR? Do you have the skills and talent available within the organization to target or at least address those upcoming issues? So this is the way I'm looking at it. And if we talk about business partnership, it's all about that. Understanding the core of the business and see how you can add value to it.
It's a very good point, and obviously, thanks, Magas, because I think, it's all too easy to just position HR in a purely commercial context, and actually a lot of the principles that we were discussing before are, not unique to commercial, actually. but it's a different, as you say, you just have to understand the business.
Yeah, I think it's about the value, and value different by organization. But what does that look like? You know, there's so much energy on this HR topic. Monica, I'm actually thinking, you know, we should have a half day or a day conference called HR.
I'm thinking 2 days now.
It should be called HR for Uber times, yeah?
I just had
Because
to
I can
add
feel that
one
energy
point.
on this thing, yeah?
With all this conversation and you speaking of with the biases that exist, HR don't make to the GM or CEO position. We actually have somebody here, Santosh Panikar from SRK Consulting, HR head, CHRO, and then now he's the CEO.
There you go, brilliant. Well done, brilliant. Okay, folks, I'm going to spend 15 minutes on unconscious bias, but the central theme is around how do you deal with yourself? Because that's where the dynamic has to start, okay? And I'll tell a few stories, and then I'm going to get into something around how does this play out and destroy value? Because it does destroy value in organizations. So I was in a HR summit last week in Dubai, and there was I did a presentation, and after that two folks from Saudi Arabia arrived at I was sitting at a little table at a coffee shop, and they wanted to talk to me. Now, being the typical person, I got up and shook hands with the Saudi guy first. I don't know why him first. And I tried to shake hands with the Saudi lady, and she said, no. What went on? There was this deep unconscious bias that you shake everybody's hand. But in the Saudi context, you don't shake everybody's hand. I had no idea. Was I innocent? Yes. Did I make a mistake? Yes. Was it an innocent mistake? Yes. So it was an embarrassing situation. I had to apologize profusely, okay? See how you can destroy something. And then for a big FMCG, global FMCG company, I ran a training program on unconscious bias. And during the lunch break, the person takes me out for lunch, the host or my client, and we're sitting around, two of us, and we finish lunch, and the waiter comes, and he has the bowl in his hand, and he gives the bowl to me. Why would he give the bowl to me? I wasn't paying. The client took me out for lunch, and she was female, by the way. Okay, now you get the context. Why did he give the bowl to me? There's a reason. In his mind, if you mail, you pay. Yeah, it's not true. That is not true, okay? Take that, generalize that throughout the organizations you work in. How much value you can destroy when somebody pitches up and you have this veil and this lens and you make a big mistake. You misjudge the person, yeah? Unconscious bias plays out in your judgment and the decisions you will make in organizations, which might not be correct, yeah? So the first thing is, watch out. The first thing is, how do you become conscious of it? Because it's unconscious. That's the most difficult thing. So in this book, Benazi wrote this book, and the funny thing is, it's amazing. They have this research, and she has this diagram on one of the pages, and the diagram is just dots, you know, just dots. And it was people's view of who has more authority, and they looked at pictures and they mapped the pictures using dots, okay? And they had two diagrams, dots. The one diagram where you had the silhouette of a person was wider than the other one. The silhouette was wider. Who do you think will perceive as having more authority? The ones where the person seemed physically larger or smaller? Wider. You do it unconsciously. You make an assumption that person is more authoritative. Which is bad for me, you know, because I'm very small. So I've used other techniques.
Which is good for me.
And this is how these things play out in organizations. These are the three things I wanted to cover. Just give you a quick conceptual view. You have the experience, but I want to bring something new on the table around unconscious bias value mapping. I want to provide some insights, examples, and then just what it means for the talent agenda. Okay, a little bit of context. And just think about this. All of you whether you NGO, government, commercial organization, you have a plan. Yeah, every year you have to have a plan. Attached to that plan is a budget. There's a people plan, more than likely, which we call HR strategy, HR plan, whatever. And within inherent in many organizations, there's the D&I agenda, which we touched on several times today. But deep down, all of that is touched by something called unconscious bias, right at the top of the pyramid, which has a direct impact here. Unconscious bias is a business issue. Okay, it's a global issue, it's just not a local issue. D&I, it's within the D&I space, it can create a competitive advantage. The more diverse, and all the science and all the research is showing, the more diverse your organization is, the more successful you can be. Now let me ask a question. Is it about racial diversity? Is it about gender diversity? Is it about, religious diversity? Why? What is it about diversity? Is there something deeper around diversity? Is it not about the diversity of perspective then? Which says, we're in one room, and there's several of us at a table, and if we said, here's a problem, each table, we'd like you to solve that. Imagine the social dynamic, as I call it, that's going to go on there for like at least 20 minutes. The unconscious biases that are playing out, the judgments you're making about each other, how you're filtering that person's answer based on that profile that you're seeing there. It plays out every single day in every organization. Now as HR, what can we do about that? And how do we address this in a way that drives more value in organizations? Okay. What do you see in that picture? A rock star. Okay, that's our first view. This is a lead guitarist, a band called Styx. I think it's James Young, yeah? That individual, Monica. Monica and I packaged this some time ago for another client. He's actually an engineer in aerospace. Now, who will believe that by looking at the profile? Yeah? It's very difficult to understand that. But these things will inhibit your potential, inhibit the organization's potential. Okay, here's the definition of unconscious bias, and this is where I'm going to start to wind down. It's a split second. It is automatic. Let me show you how it catches all of us.
Here's a story, and you might have heard it. A father and his son are driving in a car. They're driving down the freeway. Some of you have heard it, okay? For those who heard it, just put your hand down. He's driving down the freeway, a horrific accident, and unfortunately, the father dies, the son gets rushed to a hospital, and they go through to emergency, and they call for the surgeon. The surgeon then arrives and says, I can't operate on this person, he's my son. Okay, so son, how's that possible? So those who know, don't answer. How's it possible for those who've never heard this one? How's that possible? The answer is simple. The surgeon's his mother. Okay? Several of us got caught on the split-second automatic response. Quick, yeah? It just swallowed us in. Immediately, yeah? That is, your unconscious bias just played out where you felt it yourself, yeah? Okay. Just want to go on. There's different biases. I'll skip that. It's a little something that I show people how their worldview can actually distort their own view. This is a very important one. Very, very important one. Just read that concept. Okay. This is strange. So if you're on a flight, in an airplane, and the pilot comes on,
and you hear a female voice as the pilot. The male is normally, oh, it is a little reaction, yeah? But rationally we know that the pilot's competent, yeah? But there's this thing that just comes in you, like, oh my word, okay. And the funny thing is you then rationalize. You say, no, it's okay. In your brain, in two different parts of your brain, there's two different arguments going on. Believe it or not. Now how can in one person's headspace, two thoughts that contradict each other happen? So yeah, in your frontal cortex, your rational brain is saying, it's okay. The primitive brain is saying, woo, we're gonna crash. But my point I'm trying to make is that this plays out every single day in all organizations, yeah? And I was in the US for an assignment, and man, you could taste the unconscious biases as I was going along, okay, for that assignment. An African arriving as a senior director, and look at you, and I'm small. What can this guy tell us, yeah? You can see it in the eyes, yeah? And it was a hell of an experience. It was not an easy assignment. You'd think America would be an easy assignment, but it's the view of others of how they see you and your world, okay? Right, one more concept I want to show you, and then I'm going to finish off, yeah?
Andre, keep the mic, we are trying to record.
It's kind of difficult to keep the hand and the mic and draw, yeah? But I'm going to try, okay? Steve showed you earlier on a P&L, also called an income statement, financial statement, whatever. You know, the finance guys, they know how to confuse HR. They call revenue, turnover, sales, they call it a number of things like, oh, by the way, it all means the same thing at the end of the day. So they can confuse you, okay? So just think about this for a second. If that's the P&L, so you got the revenue line always on top, the kind of profitability down there, and there's things that happen in this thing, okay? As HR, if you start with this document and you meet with your finance guy, actually, you've tripled your legitimacy overnight. It's not often you will sit with the finance guy to talk about the business. You meet with him about your budget and how much they're going to cut out of your learning and development segment, okay? Or you meet with the person around governance or something, okay? Spend more time with the CFO. Just get in there and just talk about business. I've never ever met a CFO who said, no, I'm too busy to talk to you about business. They love talking about finance, they love talking about their business, yeah? But don't be shy, get in there, okay? So you got the P&L, and there's various things, initiatives every year that drive either cost reduction or new innovative products will drive your revenue line, or your cost of sale will drive that. You want to keep that low so that your profitability can go up. There's initiatives, okay? So, and Steve pointed out that there's always people issues in there. Now, just think about the social engagements in your company. There's various meetings. You have management meetings, executive meetings, you have board meetings, you have supply meetings, you have demand forecasting meetings, new product launch meetings. So you have these people, on average 6 or 7 will be in a room, okay? As HR, part of our role is to see what the unconscious bias are, the destroying value in those interfaces. And the funny thing is that people will never ever be able to pick it up until you step into the frame and you show them what unconscious bias can do, destroy a session. Because deep in those sessions, whether it's R&D one, value is being destroyed immediately. Why? Because people have views. People have biases. They have a view of, hey, marketing, you guys just spend. R&D, you guys are smoking something. Yeah? And that plays out every single day. The minute you step in as HR and you start to break up what you see as the priority unconscious bias within a unit or an organization, and you start addressing it, you just become the liberator. Nowhere where I've ever gone have people said, I don't like the concept of unconscious bias. It's one of those that bring the highest level of interest in any session. It's unbelievable. When I go into a company and they do the rating of the session, it comes out 80 plus, 90%. The fulfillment that people get out of it. But it's not about the fulfillment. You've opened up a world. You've showed them there can be more. You showed them the potential that they can have if we just help them take the lens off there. So that is my session on unconscious bias. This thing here we call unconscious bias value mapping. So UB value mapping. I'm going to show you some more value mapping in other things that we do. Okay, let me stop. Come up some. Any questions? Thanks, Monica. Sorry.
No problem.
Questions? No questions? Here we go.
Here you go.
So I'm curious, how do you actually go about unveiling this when you go into an organization? Unveiling the unconscious biases. For each person, because for each person it could be different.
It will be different for people. But you'll find, and I didn't show the earlier slide, first of all, your really deep understanding of the society, the macro environment that you're operating. Because in there, people come with those things. It came from their childhood, it came from their background. There's certain, what I call, in the culture, there's some inherent ones that sit there. If you're in South Africa, there are many, okay, which are around race. So you know there's a racial issue. There will be a race issue immediately when you go into the session. The second, you might say there's a geography issue, because even if we're the same race, you live in the south, I live in the north. There's a dynamic that will come out at some point. The other big thing in some countries is language. You know, if I speak this lingo, and we have a like me bias, I tend to agree with you. When I was in the US, I tend to look for South Africans because they know me and they understand me, okay? So if you're in a group session, I know they will support me because they understand me. They know where I'm coming from. So the first is really understand that cultural dimension. The second is in every organization there's a dynamic which has been created over many years, maybe as you said earlier through the founder, and they create the culture of that organization, which is the way that people will behave and show up. I'll give you an example. If you're in an organization where HR has been delegitimized for 20 years, imagine how difficult it is to get legitimacy. Why? Because it's unconscious bias, HR value, zero. Yeah? That sits there, it's somewhere deep in an organization. Yeah? So you've got to really decode what those cultural dimensions are which are causing these breakdowns in value. If you're working in a very autocratic, hierarchical organization, if you contradict your boss in a meeting, innocently, if you come from a liberated company, and it happened to me several times, yeah? I worked in the coach system, very liberated, you speak your mind, take your shirt off, you macho, yeah? I arrived in another company which was very empathetic, and I tried to do that macho thing, like the CEO called me and said, you need to calm down. That was the unconscious, I did it unconsciously, okay? I had no intent of offending. My intention was never offense, yeah? So the first is the broader community, where you come from. Second, the third is the individual. We all have different ways of growing up. We all have different parenting. And very early in our lives, we form these biases which sit forever. By the way, once you have a bias, it sits there. The same thing comes out over and over, regardless how you rationalize. So if you're LGBT pro, I believe everybody can have their choice in the world, and you see two men kissing, it's like, no. But then you've got to realize that the same reaction repeats itself multiple times, but you know it's there. When you get the unconscious bias awareness, you own it. You must say, that's me. And be honest with yourself. That's how I react in a situation. So there's those three things. You need to map them out, make sure you understand them, and you need to point them out to people by real practical examples. You'll see it in a session. When you're aware of unconscious bias, you sit there and you just think, oh my word, look how this is playing out. Unbelievable, okay? People don't see it, yeah? Okay, that's my answer. That's how I help companies. I'm busy designing a diagnostic with Monica around what those biases are so that you can plug and play and then add practical examples. Okay.
I found Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow very helpful.
In fact, Monica, yeah, she showed me something on Fast and Slow the other day, I think, yeah. Brilliant. No, but it's if you want to destroy value, let those things create a toxic environment for your company. You have to address them, yeah. No D&I agenda will work if you don't address that stuff. It will never work.
Andrea, just one interesting part. So while you said, each department sitting meetings, everybody brings in the unconscious. I think everybody agrees that we have unconscious biases and we put it to practice. Very difficult to remove that. Having said that, if you're saying that HR can be a part of this, and be a liberator, how does that actually happen on the ground? I mean, is it really possible? While it's a good thought, it's a good intent, is it really possible?
It is totally possible. You have to be an activist, and not only an activist, you have to be present in those sessions. But it's not by accident only. There has to be a planned initiative around it, okay? Conscious. Your CEO, your company must endorse it. We're gonna address this issue, in a session. What you will find, if you're doing it consciously and as an organizational rollout, it becomes a very sensitive issue in your company, because you're addressing some deep issues, particularly when it comes to racial issues, where people are very uncomfortable. So you must be very careful how you roll it out. The other thing is, you sit at board meetings, executive meetings, you see these things play out and you do nothing as an HR head. And we said earlier, it's your job as HR to address some of these people dynamics. Don't only look at the revenue line, look at the dynamic line, So you have to do something about it. If you did nothing about it, I think it will come back and haunt you one day. Like I've seen in another company, they left it. And somebody said something in a meeting which offended something and the issue ended up in court. But what was said was an unconscious bias comment. It ended up in court. That's how bad it can get if you did nothing about it eventually. Okay.
Unconscious bias many times takes the the word of intuition, hunch, feel, and we see it maximum in recruitment. Very often people get rejected. I didn't like the guy. His shoes weren't okay. His body language wasn't okay. And we've seen some very, very good candidates rejected because of these unconscious biases.
Brilliant. So it's a pity we haven't got a day on that. So in my workshop we give, how do you, in your human value chain processes, how do you eliminate? When you get a CV and somebody's from a certain academic institution, woo, Harvard, must be good, yeah? But I've seen the opposite. It just plays out. It just plays out in a very funny way. The age one is unbelievable, okay? Yep. Age and energy. And I went through processes with companies, and I know they were playing the age bias against me, and you feel very bad, okay? When you get to a certain age and you see the age bias playing out, like, what can you do? You have no energy. Yeah. We're all gonna get there. Just be aware of it, okay? And how you deal with it. I wrote an article, I love to send it to you. It's around retrenched employees, and when they show up, how the recruiters have a bias against them. This is it. Oh, you got retrenched, huh? What did you do wrong? It's a bias that plays out. And that person might have done nothing wrong. The company closed down, Sorry, yeah.
Just on the implementation part of the value mapping that you're talking about, from an organization perspective, and a lot of times when we sit at the board tables, what we come across is every time there's a little jittery feeling whenever we talk about matrices, evaluations, pre, post, and then a baselining kind of an activity. Especially when you want to position an activity which is around that today we'll do a workshop and over a period of time we'll identify some set of people who will fall in a box, and then there's this aspect of saying what is going to happen then. You do PIPs, you do XYZ things, a lot of time organizations take a call and then there's a baselining activity that happens. So when you position something as valuable as this, whereas there's an unconscious bias value mapping, I'm sure there's going to be, you would have encountered areas where people will come back saying, what after this? What happens after the workshop? Are you going to evaluate? Is there a parameter where you say, okay, these are my set of people who, in spite of training, in spite of mapping, there's nothing happening to them? And how do you deal with that issue at a board table?
Okay, it's a good question. First of all, it's not an initiative, it's a journey. You got to park that. You will always have it in your organization. You're always going to have you have to always be proactive around it. Your company is going to have to ingratiate itself around a certain value. it might say, look, we want psychological safety in our company. People must talk about it openly. There has to be a journey, and it's never going to end, by the way. So it's not something that, the last thing I would recommend is go to your CEO and say, we like to do unconscious bias. They say, oh, HR, that unconscious bias come out, HR, another fad. Oh. You know, it's got to be part of something much deeper, much more meaningful. So if you look at the company that I saw as the benchmark was Google, actually. All their materials online, by the way. You can go find all their slides, everything they ever did in that company, all the changes they made to make sure that there was an awareness and a journey that is continuing up to today in Google. Yeah? So that is what I would recommend. I don't have the $1 million answer around making it stick. Yeah? Okay.
Got it, thanks.
I have. Okay, good.
I think this is fun.
Okay, my question comes, predominantly, again, it's linked to this one because we talk a lot about leadership development, about leadership behaviors, so somewhere when we talk about value mapping, I'm also linking it to, behaviors and competencies and what is required, from a leadership perspective. So just wanting to understand your take on that, because to make it stick, you have to have it at the leadership level. So how do you make this stick?
Again, like I said, it's got to be an organizational issue. It mustn't be seen as an intervention. It's got to be part of your, as you guys had said earlier, the DNA. Yeah? It's got to be ingratiated in your organization that we are a D&I company, and we part of our D&I journey forever. And diversity is about diversity of opinion, and forever we will look at what those unconscious biases are. We must eliminate them, okay? And every leader should take ownership eventually for that. Yeah? I would start, if you want to do measure, you can't measure how you manage unconscious bias. It's so difficult to measure. Yeah? The first step is the awareness, and then manage the things that you see are the destructive in your company today. In South Africa, the biggest destruction in every organization is this race issue that plays out every single day. Are we going to get rid of it? No. Are we on top of it? Yes. You have to be there every day. Okay.
Just linked to that as well, sorry, I was taking it further. But, typically from a behavior perspective, and you want to bring in a change, so you reward and you correct. Because, that is one of the options that you can do to bring in stickiness. So, do you think that would work in this space? Because you can identify certain behaviors, and in case of it works, you reward it, and it doesn't work, you correct it. I mean, just wanted to have your take on this one.
Yeah, again, remember you're dealing with the unconscious bias. Normally the person exhibiting the behavior is not even aware of it, or the thought, or the words. They're not even aware of that, okay? So how do you reward or you inhibit somebody who doesn't know what they've done? I think, so, but for me it goes back to the awareness. I will, if you have that humility to recognize that you have it, I will reward you, because you already started a massive journey of recovery here. I'm so sensitive over the last 2 years since I got exposed to the concept of unconscious bias. The funny thing, I see it now more than I ever did in my life. In the last 30, 40 years, I was not aware of it. In the last 2 years, my awareness is unbelievable. I'm sitting on a flight from Dubai to Mumbai. Somebody's sitting next to me. He's local. He speaks, is it Gujarat? He speaks, he's speaking to me in that language. Normally I would say, this guy's stupid, But it's his unconscious bias, which was a like me bias. It says, hey, we family, yeah? But he had no idea we're not, yeah? It was innocent. In the past I would have been offended. It's like, oh, you just stepped into it too. I was standing in a shop the other day, and there were the shop owner, and there was another person. They were speaking, and I was just watching this dialogue play out, okay? And the person says to the shopkeeper, I was in this part of Cape Town the other day, and there's a lot of foreigners there, all from Somaliland. You know what? They all look the same, yeah? It's like, Okay, that's the first unconscious bias, that if you smile, you will all look the same. So I thought, that's one. Then the shopkeeper, who's from Greece, says, yeah, all these foreigners do look the same. And he's a foreigner. I mean, I told my wife the story, look at it. 2 unconscious biases playing out here in front of my eyes, okay? It's like, wow, this is amazing, okay? But you have to show people the stories, you have to tell the stories and show them and point it out. You know, you just did this. You just put your foot in it, by the way. Excellent, okay. Moving along, what I'd like to do now is talk about talent value management. I'm going to show you the slides I presented last week at the HR Summit in Dubai. They're very visual, very short, they're very hopefully impactful there. This is what I have. I won't use the full 45 minutes. I'm going to use less than that. I'm going to do the intros and then just get into what TVM is all about. It is an introduction, okay? And I'll give you the philosophy, some concepts, but most importantly, give you these 2 takeaways. When you go back, you will challenge your head of talent or your head of HR on these things, and I'll give you some tools. So stop. You know what to do at a stop sign. If you're in Africa, you go right through it. If you're in a taxi. Unconscious bias. But ask yourself these 2 questions. Why do organizations do talent management? First, what problem are you solving? And the second, what is its purpose? And there's, let's say 25 of you here, I'll get 25 responses. I know that, okay? Because it's normally about the philosophy of talent management. History lesson. Talent management, think about the words talent management, which means we've got to manage the talent. That is not what happens in the contemporary environment. We manage the process. We manage the administrative templates that go with it, the data. In most companies, it's become a process. And people forgot that there's something around talent and value. So there's been this global shift, okay? And if you look at where we are now, there's a real demand that you got to make sure this thing adds value. And this is the key question I put to people. Okay, depending on how you answer the question, it will be indicative of the type of work and the nature of work that you're doing. Now, I'll come back to this question later, okay? So here's a chart. On the one axis is value, -1 to 10. If you're doing talent administration, which is filling out the forms, the Excel spreadsheets, performance potential analysis, blah, 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 a lot of that work, you'll get -1. If you're focusing on this area around, let's drive value with our very best, you'll get closer to the 10. This is what's happening in the world. Now, whether it's exactly like this for your organization or not, it depends. But in most companies, there's a similar process, which starts with, there's core administration, I need talent data, there's some templates, there's some matrix, let's get some information on talent. If you're working for a Fortune 50 company, don't change the template. You want to get into trouble? Don't be innovative, yeah? You don't try to add anything to that template, okay? Just do as you're told, yeah? Okay. Ask me, I was the head of talent, senior talent director for Europe, Middle East, Africa. Don't go there. You'll get a nasty hand grenade from somewhere in the US, yeah? Early in the process, there's a list. I call that list the political list. Imagine asking somebody in a function marketing, give me your list of talent. And the marketing head says, I have no talent in my function. Political suicide, yeah? Nobody will say that. So you put some people on the list. Yeah, okay, here's my list. By the way, I can give you 15 if you ask for 10. Because we are a very talented unit, I'm a talent maker. As you go along, there's processes that kick in. And this is where a lot of companies make money around the assessments. If you're unfortunate, you'll end up with a 63-page report for one individual. When you do assessment, you've got to show volume here. I'm charging you an arm and a leg, okay? I need my 63-page report to show you I'm impressing you, okay? It's a large report, yeah? You get the development, and hopefully the development is accurate and is the right thing for that person in the context that you want. Quite often you spend the money, but you know, the wrong program, yeah? Very well back. If you're lucky, and then you talk about succession planning, whose block going into which. That is how it plays out worldwide. My emphasis here, guys, it's a hell of an administrative process. Ask the heads of talent in those jobs today. That's what burdens you, brings you down, okay? Three universal words used with talent management: potential, the obsession with succession, and the last is around development. Those are always the three words that come out. We use different analogies like pipeline and a whole lot of other words to describe the same thing, yeah? There's a definite change. McKinsey are talking about it. Person by Deloitte, in their report, they have a talent continuum. If you're doing admin, you're in the red zone. You really don't want to be there. You really want to go up around the value driving part. Okay, let's talk about TVM. So what is TVM? Long definition, okay? Have a look at that. We'll start with this. What is your organization's philosophy around talent management, around talent? What is the philosophy? So if you work for the Human Insights Corporation, or with the Human Insight Corporation, it's about value at the end of the day, but it's deeper than value, okay? Let me break it up into its simplistic parts, okay? So first, what are the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve? You spoke a lot about that today. Whether it's revenue, cost of sale reduction, market share came up quite often, profitability. There's certain business outcomes. If you, for a not-for-profit organization, sure as heck, there are outcomes. You are measured on something, yeah? If you're working in a NGO, you know, the number of grants you get are dependent on certain things, so there are measures, the second thing around this journey is around every company here in this room is distinctive in something, otherwise you will not exist. Distinctive internally, you better than the competitors in it, whatever it is. Steve pointed out earlier today with Unilever, that distribution efficiency is quite big. Yeah? If you work with a Coke company and you work in the emerging markets, how do you get a Coke to the extreme of a geography? It's a unique internal capability that those guys have, okay? The Human Insights Corporation, what makes us different? We depth layered, we experienced. We don't have the theory. I will tell you the solution very quickly too. You might not like it, but we will give you an opinion, okay? So there's certain things, certain business outcomes that you have, and these things ignite these business outcomes. Without this, you might not get those business outcomes. You might be lucky if you don't. How long do you think it will take if you haven't got a list of the top 5 of these in your company? It takes a while to nail what it is. Companies struggle. The funny thing, I've never seen companies struggle so much to identify the top 5 what makes them distinctive. Because you forget, you do it so everyday automatic, okay? I worked with a healthcare company in Dubai, and they're very entrepreneurial. For healthcare pharma, it's unusual. Imagine hearing that healthcare company is entrepreneurial. It doesn't sound right, eh? And they have such fantastic talent who own the business, they make decisions, they're quick. Now imagine them against a big pharma company. Who's got more speed to market? They have far, far more. Whose share are they going to take? The big guys, very quickly, because they're very good at what they do, okay? And within this, there's the number one internal capability. They said, you know what makes us different? The way we engage with healthcare professionals. I'm like, really? Tell me more. And they explained why they did it different to anybody else, okay? And they were right. That's where they were getting their market share from. So business outcomes driven by this DIOCs now, so I just labeled it short. But your key talent who underpin or align or enable this DIOC to get those business outcomes are very important, okay? So step 1, step 2, step 3. Let me map out these 3 steps for you, okay? I've just taken the philosophy, I've dropped it into a process now, okay? So the first step in the Human Insights TVM process is around significant amount of activities focused on supporting key talent to drive value. Okay? So the first thing is defining, be obsessed with what those business outcomes. Make sure you understand them. Whenever I consult with any organization, I spend 30% of my time here. If I don't get these value drivers, I'm not going to consult with you. I'm busy with Steve and I actually. Next week we're in a country called Namibia, which is west coast of Africa. Namibia. And I think we're going to have a little bit of challenge with the client because they're not clear. It's like, okay, then first thing we're going to have to help them clarify this thing, okay? What are your business outcomes? What's your strategic imperatives? They gave us a 2014 strategy. It's like, next year's 2018, eh? You're going to have a challenge here. So we're going to have to play a role there. The second thing is, what are the DIOCs distinctive to ignite this thing? What are the critical roles? Who are the key talent? And how do you nurture this key talent to drive value? That in its intellectual simplicity is TVM. And that's the process we use to implement TVM in corporations. Easy to understand, but it's a bit of labor to get into it. Let me make it even easier. So the first part, number one, is really the business focus. Strategy, roles, what makes me distinctive. Second part, stories, key talent. Who are they that can help? And then lastly, how do I nurture? What I'd like to bring your eye to, the attention here. Look where the discussion around talent takes place. Very deep in a process. Most companies will start with that discussion here. Give me the list, yeah? That's where they will start. In short, what business needs to be successful? Plus the key talent, plus nurture is TVM. Some tools, let me show you practically what it looks like. That's the process I've advocated. Here's a talent value mapping. Same thing, P&L. Showed it to a company yesterday. The HR director must have referred to this chart 5 or 6 times after we showed him that. Yeah? He was excited. He'd never seen a chart and mapped this way. So in every company you have this, it exists, and there's incremental growth annually from one business cycle to another. In there is your business strategic thrust. So what does the business achieve over this period that has been defined for it? For example, in this company, a big revenue driver is Africa expansion. Okay, this is a company in developed markets want to get into emerging markets. What will make this company distinctive to get their Africa expansion is really Africa business development. For those who worked in Africa, it's a very unique way to do business development. You cannot bring, and I'm generalizing because this might be unconscious bias, you cannot bring someone, let's say from Schaffhausen, Switzerland or whatever, to go work in Nigeria, who've never been in Nigeria. It will be a tough assignment, yeah, to do business development there, because there's things that are not on paper, yeah, that you don't see, the dynamics. So what is the critical role that does Africa business development? Will it be the BD manager Africa who ignites this, who does this expansion to get 2% revenue growth? And then you talk about whose hand is up, okay? Who have we got? That is basic talent value mapping. You can do this with HR value mapping, learning and development value mapping, so you can do it. In fact, you could even put what skills do you need down here once you've done this mapping. You can do it. You can use this process in so many ways. So that's one tool I show you here. There's another one. It's called a talent value grid. The talent value grid is all those same things in the P&L, revenue, margins, cost reduction, and our added market share, just mapped out in 7 columns. What's my DIOC? What's my critical role? Who's my key talent? Which is the last column in this thing. It's called a TVG, talent value grid. You can go immediately back to your company now, immediately, and you can say, okay, let me just write on a piece of paper what these are, and let me just write this column. You can take 2 columns, and you can go create this thing and say, but oh my word, digital marketing is a big thing for us, but there might be a little challenge here. We're not going to get to this thing. So here's one tool, okay, instantly. And these are different sectors, and you can play it out different ways, okay. Take that tool a little further, give you a visual. This is an investment company that I saw. I prepared the slide the night before the meeting because I knew the guy used to talk about money. I went to him and said, okay, what's your incremental growth for next year? How much more money you want to make? He said, X amount. I said, okay, this was $10,000. That's your business outcomes, incremental top line growth. I asked him, what makes you distinctive? He said, customer service. I said, but that doesn't sound distinctive. Everybody says the same thing, huh? Customer service. Within customer service, what makes you distinctive? Half an hour later, he still didn't have the answer. So now he invited me back. So the 26th of November, we're going to speak again, another round of discussion on TVM. Hopefully by then he's figured out what makes him distinctive. Okay. I then said, now what are your critical roles? He said, these guys that engage with the customers around investments and that. Those roles are so critical for my growth. And if I lose any of those people, I have a crisis. I'm not going to get this growth. So that is basically a TBG with a philosophy. Give you another tool. You've seen all that performance potential grid. I don't want to go there. It's 17 years old, this grid, yeah? It's okay. It helped us. But now let's see how we move past that. Here's a little more complex. So TVGs all compiled into one document which has distinctive internal organizational capabilities on the one axis, and the other axis is value. And you then map your talent against the value that they got to deliver and against that internal capability. And it'll be interesting to see what comes out in your company, because immediately you're going to know who to give more attention to. You know, like, ooh, this guy is a value driver, big value driver, you know. He goes, she goes, big issue, yeah. Okay, TVM is an 11-step process. It's in the book. Certain things, start with your philosophy. Make sure you know why you're doing talent management. And I stop there for come up with some Q&A. Questions?
Thank you, Andrew. Nicely done. I have a question. See the tangible values, right? Every organization has some way of quantifying them. And some of them measure the talent against those values, some of them do not. But the intangible values that are coming across now in the newer age organizations that are very disruptive, what we struggle with is how do I define them and how do I find talent that addresses that value? It could be disruption, it could be innovation, it could be the brand equity and the market share is more measurable. So the intangible values, question one, how do I measure them? Second is, what I grapple with is, how do I know this person is contributing to the intangible value because I don't have a means of measuring it?
Okay, so you'll see on the TVG that I showed earlier, there's a bottom line that says intangible.
I saw that, that's why the question.
Okay, so here's the part. Maybe I can just draw something. But let me ask it, I'm going to push back with another question to you now. And use an analogy. You have a senior HR or you have a talent or HR director who's talented. You want to put that person maybe in another function, you might want to promote that person, okay? What would you measure that person on his value? What are you doing in the HR agenda first? What are you driving? Yeah. So that's the first thing around. So finance, IT, maybe quality to a certain extent. There are certain intangibles there. Okay. Man, they must be measured against something. If you're not measuring against something intangible, there's something not right in the organization. It means that it just, the function is just doing something. Yeah. There has to be some measure. Now, whether it's a direct or indirect link to the P&L, it's another question, yeah?
Yeah, the direct measures are quantifiable, right? And it's easy to measure. Everybody has the tangible ones and you can measure them, all functions measure. My question is more around the intangible values that come. And nowadays, every organization is starting to say that, the tangible values, which I was very comfortable driving, is taken. It's basic sanity. Anyway, you need to deliver revenue growth, you need to deliver margin growth, you need to deliver EPS and so on and so forth. but what are you delivering in terms of innovation? What are you delivering in terms of disruptive innovation? What are you delivering in terms of your brand equity? And then, as a CEO, I probably can take a few examples. My challenge is, how do I pass it down the line? How do I measure a person on the ground who's at an executive level and break it down?
Okay. So first of all, there has to be a measure where there's innovation, new product launches, disruptive thinking. Yes, nice concepts, but for what purpose? There has to be an outcome somewhere along the line because of that, okay? And I just want to, because sometimes it's not, TVM is not every employee in your organization. And maybe I can, when I map it out now, I'll show you why you will ring fence your what you measure. You have to. So think about it this way, okay? This is your employee universe, where you have 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people, okay? Within that universe, I'm not sure what the concept would be in India, there's a talent pool. Yeah? So every company has a talent pool. And I'm not sure why they have a talent pool as a start, you know. It's a sexy thing. Everybody else has got a talent pool, we must have one too, yeah? Then, the last one is around, and I use that word, key talent by design. Because these guys are directly linked to a DIOC. And these guys are either linked directly to a tangible, which is normally on the P&L, or an intangible measure. Okay? And it's not your whole organization universe. These, as Professor, I forgot his name, from INSEAD, Paul Evans, Professor Paul Evans, he will say, these people are your mission critical people. They drive a higher proportion of value. You should know what that value is. Eh? Otherwise, why are they in this pool? These are the people that you have to nurture. Now, the pushback is, what about these in this universe, okay? For me, when you start to ring fence your talent strategy, not that you're discriminating, you're differentiating, you should come up with the values, whether tangible or intangible. So, hopefully I've answered the question. If not, we can keep talking.
Thank you.
Thanks. I just want to add on to what Anita is saying. I think I will again link it back to the culture of the organization, where you don't not only want to define what got done, you also want to define how it got done. And a lot depends on when the business leaders are assessing people, where we want to know and we want to kind of drive the business results and we want to measure that, but we also want to be cognizant of how it got done. And I can just share from one of the examples that Dun & Bradstreet has internally is we've created something called the Value Awards. Okay, and there are 3 values that we have internally, which is being data inspired, because we are a data company, being relentlessly curious, and being inherently generous. So what we do is every quarter we recognize people only on these values. It is then automatically gets linked to what Andrea's been saying, that how they use some of these values to drive business results, but it puts a lot of focus on the things that you talked about, innovation, the behaviors, challenging this protocol, and you have all of these stories that don't come out in the obvious way that come out when you're recognizing people on the demonstrated behaviors. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks for sharing. And guys, I am absolutely obsessed with around the value that the companies create and the talent link that way. Absolutely obsessed. Why? For 17 years we've not done this link. We've done the stuff. And we must, even if we just try to take a step in the right direction, worldwide changes agenda. It has to change at some point. The CEOs are asking for this, okay? Up till today, I've touched more than 10,000 people on the concept of the way we must change at some point. And even if you go today back to your organization and you just think about, but there's the value, but there's no link to this talent agenda, you've taken a seismic step. You become a TVM advocate. You don't need to use TVM as your Trojan horse. You can use your own logic, your own process, your own thinking, but force that process. I really encourage you to force the process, okay? Because we've lost some legitimacy as HR because of the administrative processes that we've instituted. Here's a chance to kind of get some of that legitimacy back in.
So Andre, I have a question here. So while you're saying you focus on the key talent piece of it, so you're indicating that we look at the key talent, and I agree with you. It's the 80-20 principle which drives a lot of firms. It's based on that. So majority that particular workforce is actually the key one which is pushing through. But my question here is, while we focus on that, are we completely going to negate the other workforce? Because the idea is about increasing that 20 to a larger population, or training or developing, or the more value-added talent that you can create in the talent, the better it is for any organization. So what's your take on that?
I totally agree with you. There's a start, okay? My assumption in the book are very clear. Everyone's talent. Start with that assumption, and then you can get quite far. Quite often you see somebody has fantastic potential, but in a few years' time, he's not so potential anymore, okay? Something else has changed there. But to answer your question, once you've got this, okay, and you got this mapped out and you got this in place, and you're going 2 cycles, 2 years on this stuff, you have to broaden that up. You have to. You have to. The end of the day is the sum of success is the sum of everybody driving value. Yeah? And you got to work towards that, yeah? Totally. You got to make that bigger, but you got to start. Okay. I'd love to spend 2-3 days with you. I run a workshop for a day. I've given you like a day's workshop in a few slides, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make a few quick announcements. So, we will be holding TVM and commercial astuteness workshops in 2018, so we'll keep you posted with the information, with dates and everything else. We are conducting a global study, and we'll be reaching out to each of you. It is a quick 10 to 15 minutes survey, and it's around talent value management and commercial astuteness. So what are the pain points we really want to see? And again, it's a global survey, but we'll also cut it with the Indian market, and your information would be confidential. And if you were to participate in the survey, obviously we'll share the results and the report with you. And if any of you want to meet Andre and Steve in person, they are here until Friday. However, we just have one slot open now, which is Thursday, first half. So between 8:30 and 12:30, and we're flexible to meet at Sofitel or your office in Mumbai. And lastly, the event was conceptualized and managed by NeoSeven Solutions. So we have Mahesh, Raj, Sarvesh from our team. I also want to thank Mayuri Bastikar for managing the registration desk and volunteering. So she's a Rutgers alum. She's just moved back from US, and just on one phone call, sort of a mentee, my mentee, I would say. So glad you're here. Thank you so much. And thank you so much everyone for coming to the event, sitting through it. And I'd like us to take a group picture, and then anybody who wants to get the book signed, you're most welcome.
So don't leave the stage yet. I'd like to thank Monica very much. It's an unbelievable amount of effort. She put a Trojan effort to make this happen, and we were dealing with each other for like 5 months to get this started and going. And Steve coming down as well from London. Really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Okay, that ends there.